Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Aidan Mundy, and tonight we are going to be taking the agenda as read. Just a bit of a recap. I do this because those online or those attending may be new or first time taking part in planning. So the general item and cadence is officer will present the application, including anything in the modification sheet. Those objecting, and we've got several tonight, and we'll speak first, then the applicant, then the ward councillor, then further officer representations, and then we'll take questions from councillors on the committee, ideally one at a time, and then any comments and general observations, and then may or may not have a debate, and then we'll go on to the vote for each item. And I try to keep the committee to about 3 hours or so. So we'll try and get everything done in time, should do. And I'll call people's attention to 10:30. So whatever business there is, we can try to complete that as quickly as possible. And after an hour and a half, because it is quite hot, and several of us I know are just coming out the other side of COVID, we may take a short 5-minute break. So is there any questions, any issues? No, super duper.
Sorry, I have one.
Susie, go for it.
I'm so sorry. On 43 Woodside, Mr. Core is coming to speak, I think. And there are a couple of questions I would like to ask him. Is that something we can do?
I think the current format doesn't allow that direct representation, I'm afraid. But let's talk about that afterwards. I appreciate your eagerness. Cool. All right, so we're going to take the agenda aside. So we've had no apologies for absences. Can I get any declarations of interest at all? I think, Tom, you may have had a declaration.
Yes, Chair, only that item 8, 26 The Grange, I took part in the consultation on behalf of residents, so I won't be voting on it.
Thank you very much for making us aware of that. Okay, so if there's no other declarations, over to the minutes. Can I have a seconder for their true and accurate representation of our last meeting?
I'm so sorry. I'm not sure if I've got the right bit, but at page 7, does this constitute part of the minutes?
So what pack are you looking at? The minutes were circulated by...
Sorry, are we being asked to...
They'll be in the second, so that was circulated by Amy earlier today.
Yeah. This is the minute of the 16th. On page 7, there's a paragraph which is being inserted into the report on the lesser site, and it's something which wasn't there the night that we had this discussion. It actually says underneath, additional comments from the planning team had not been amalgamated into this section of the report. The additional wording confirms and summarizes the principle of the development as reported. It wasn't part of the original report, and I'm very uncomfortable with it being added in now, even in bold, after the event.
I think that comprises of the declaration, correct me if I'm wrong, that was made as a result of that.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So that would be our, so that adds context there.
Okay, I think so.
Okay. Cool.
So long as it's very clear.
It is.
This wasn't there at the time.
Well, that's the point of that. That's why it says that. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. Cool. Seconder, someone hands up? Yep. Martin, thank you very much. Brilliant. Okay, so we're now on to our first item. As again, just a reminder, we're taking these as read. So housing first, normally, then any commercial, then any street, any sort of parks, trees, etc., and then anything to do with advertising or street scene. So, Tim, can I ask you to open us up talking about the land at the rear of 20 Pelham Road?
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application site outlined in red is land at the rear of 20 Pelham Road in Wimbledon. Number 20 currently is a building that's divided into 6 flats. And the proposal itself is to land at the very rear of the site, which currently does form part of the general outdoor amenity space for the flats at number 20. More of a closer up plan at the moment. This is the existing site plan. So there's currently some steps up to the garden at the back. It is currently paved. You'll see in some of my site photographs, but the site's back here. There are some trees on the site. 3 trees are to be removed as part of the proposal. 1 category U, 2 category C trees for poor quality. Close-up view as well. Running adjacent to the east of the site is a public footpath, which links Pelham Road to the road to the south. It's currently a closed boarded fence screening in the site at the moment. The idea is that the fence would be largely retained with an access gate through into the proposed dwelling house. So looking at the proposal itself, it's for a 2-bedroom detached dwelling house. It is to be sited at ground floor and at basement level. At the back of the site here, so you'll see entrance would be gate, simple pedestrian gate, and then steps down into the dwelling house at ground floor level, then below would be basement. There's 2 light wells which serve the basement level and a very small outdoor space at ground floor level. Looking at the top floor plan, so ground floor, as I said, you would come through here off the public footpath, steps down. The reason this is done is to keep the height of the building low. So upstairs, open plan, and then a stairs down to basement level. There'll be 2 double bedrooms at basement level with light wells here and here. In terms of elevation, so it is to be a timber-clad building. The idea is to be a lightweight building proposed. The height of it would be just a fraction above the fence line of the surrounding area. You can just see dotted outline the depth of the basement proposed. I do have a better section drawing further on. So here, for example, a green roof is proposed for the dwelling house, just to assist with its not only visual appearance, but increasing biodiversity. This is probably the best section drawing to draw your attention to. So this is looking south within the site per se. So you can see the access would be here. You'd step down to the dwelling house where the ground floor slab is lower than the current ground level. So that is designed on purpose to keep the height of the building low, and then you have the basement below. Some site photographs. So the site is within the Pelham Road conservation area, and you'll see within the report, officers have assessed it against the impact on this conservation area and consulted with our conservation officer. The conservation area seeks to protect what essentially you see here is the large grand Victorian properties within the road. This is the access, the public footpath. So in terms of access, it will be pedestrian access only to the house down here, and then down here, and then on the left would be a gate here. Within the site itself, it's currently paved at the back, and the site has been subdivided already with the flats to the north. There's a small wall at the back as well. The subdivided fence there. This tree here is on the public footpath. That is to be protected and not harmed. The council's tree officer has looked at the proposal and is satisfied with it in terms of trees. The idea behind the proposal is to be a lightweight looking dwelling house. It is acknowledged by officers that the basement is fairly large, and clearly there would be a decent construction period. However, just to remind members that the test with conservation area is what is the visual appearance at the end result, which is shown on the plans before you. If I draw your attention now to the modification sheet, where we've added an additional condition following review of the proposal since committee for safeguarding archaeology And also we've added to condition 17 the request from the highways officer about deliveries to take place on highways. So you'll note that the site is accessible by a public footpath. You'll see the highways officer's comments within the report. So they've not raised objection to the access proposed for the house. So a pedestrian gate off the public footpath is acceptable. And also they haven't objected in principle to the use of the footpath for construction period. However, they have outlined that they do need a highways license separately from planning, which they'll need to get before they can start any works. And so that will be reviewed at that time by the Highway Authority, our highways officers. So overall, Chair, officers recommend permission be granted subject to a 106 agreement capturing to be car parking permit free and conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think we do have some public speakers on this. So we've got Charlotte and Fabria. Charlotte, can I ask you to speak first, please, for 3 minutes?
Of course, thank you. So Fabria and I, we're residents of Cecil Road, but we're both speaking on behalf of a number of residents of Cecil, Pelham and Balfour Roads, as well as members of the wider community, and our objections fall into 3 main areas. 1, the application has not been properly assessed. 2, proposed building is inappropriate in breach of various restrictive covenants and accessibility requirements. And 3, the construction plan would have an adverse impact on the local community that is in no way balanced by the benefit of the new building. Residents remain concerned about the impact the building will have on individual properties close to the development, but also the wider area. We all agree more housing is needed, but not this. It does not help alleviate the housing pressure, but does increase density in an already crowded area. Fabria will talk about the impact on the local population and the restrictive covenants. Other policy is breached by application, specifically policy D5 of the London plan requires inclusive design. The proposed house is only accessible by steps and the steps are insufficient to install a stair lift. The application is therefore arguably invalid as it requires inclusive design statement, and this does not appear to have been assessed in the proposal. The construction plan, it is just incredibly frustrating how the plan and the summary of the comments received during the consultation process just mention in passing the closure of the pathway. It's been a route between Pelham and Cecil Road since at least 1869, public access since the 1880s. They're just casually saying it will need to be closed without any regard for the impact on the community is unacceptable. The construction plan says that Pelham is not a main route to schools, but the footpath is, as is supported by Merton Borough Council, the introduction of school streets. It's not clear this issue has been properly considered. The summary papers note that the application has been considered against Human Rights Act, but it does not talk about public sector equality duty under the Equalities Act. If anybody thinks the closure of a pathway for at least 12 months is acceptable because there are other longer routes, I'd suggest they've never experienced mobility problems or cared for someone with mobility problems. They've not been responsible for taking children to school or nursery on a regular basis. The impact on the closure on the pathway be felt by all members of the community and others who use Cecil as a cut through. It would likely fall most heavily, however, on women, children, people with a physical disability, including those with mobility issues as a result of their age. A full equality impact assessment should be completed before the removal of a valued facility. Finally, there are concerns this effort the local communities put into greening the alleyway, directly supported by Merton Borough Council's Green Streets initiative, will literally be destroyed by the pathway being turned into a works access route. Only yesterday, a further batch of plants, not just low-level shrubs, but a range of herbs, perennials and shrubs and bulbs are down there. The alleyway is now one of the most bee and butterfly friendly streets in the area. If the council does decide to allow this development to go ahead, developers must be required to replace and repair the inevitable damage caused to the alleyway rather than any costs falling to the public purse. Arguably, they should be required to improve, not just make good. In summary, there are no benefits to the local community for this proposal, but significant adverse impacts, in particular throughout the construction phase, but also once the building is finished and being used. Even if it's decided the application is indeed valid, despite its deficiencies, we urge you to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Fabria.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this time to speak. I'm the owner of 44 Cecil Road. I've actually reached out to all my local councillors for asking for support. I'm also representing 44A and 42 and other residents of Cecil Road who are strongly objecting to this planning application for many reasons, which I cannot fit in 3 minutes. And I'm not going to talk about the impact of this building would have on me personally, which is unbearable. So I'll go straight into voicing mine and the residents' reason for our objection. The planning application, I'm sorry about this, I am quite daunted by being on this place and talking, but this planning application would have a huge adverse effect on all residents and local community. It would take away the green space and the nature. It would cause overcrowding in an already overcrowded area and create noise pollution, and most importantly, set the precedent, permitting others developing companies to further commercial exploitation of green space in this conservation area, losing the charm and the character. I understand and accept from time to time properties are extended, but this is not just an extension, but a whole new property smack in the middle of green space of gardens on Pelham Road and Cecil Road, facing one another. This arrangement preserves the green space for wildlife, attracting a variety of birds over the years, which is part of the appeal of this conservation area and much appreciated green sanctuary that myself and adjoining neighbours bought into. This proposed building would be right against my garden fence, only less than 8 meters away from my sitting room, which would be a nightmare for myself and the flat above and adjoining neighbours living with the noise of the heat pump and the noise of the future occupants on a daily basis. This would diminish our quality of life, and this building is not discreet by any means, as I'm told. Another point is that building being right against my boundary wall and adjoining neighbours, according to the drawing, would be a violation of title registry of 20 Pelham Road, which states that no building can be built within 4 feet of boundary wall. Also, it states foundation should be of no more than 7 feet. In the drawing, foundation would certainly exceed 7 feet. So I'm urging you all to consider these points and the feelings of the residents and the local community in your decision-making today. Thank you for letting me speak.
Fabria, thank you so much for that. I think we've also got the agent on, Sir Jonathan Jarman. Jonathan, can you reply? I think you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant. Firstly, I would like to endorse the Planning Officer's recommendation for approving the application, which seeks to provide an additional home by optimising the use of this small site. As confirmed by the case officer in their report, the principle of development meets the aims of the relevant development plan policies. I do, however, wish to take this opportunity to highlight the following. In relation to design, the approach taken has been to provide a contemporary dwelling that is low impact on its surroundings. Indeed, the whole building will sit at a level that is the same height as the existing 1.8 metre boundary fence, meaning that the streetscape will be virtually unchanged. For the casual observer, this means the presence of a dwelling may not even be noticed. Otherwise, the building will be more akin to an outbuilding, which is not an uncommon feature of the area. Its low profile also means that the home will not overlook any neighbours, nor will it be in any way overbearing. The site is within a conservation area, and in this case, the Pelham Road Conservation Area Character Assessment places the greatest significance on the frontage of properties. The proposed home, due to the characteristics of the design already described, will not be detrimental to the main street frontage, nor to the character and appearance of the area as a whole. Indeed, it will not be seen from Pelham Road, and as confirmed by the case officer in their assessment, it is acceptable in this regard. It will also be a sustainable form of development, having been designed in accordance with Passive House standards, with the aim of achieving excellent performance in terms of air tightness, thermal efficiency and heat recovery. It is there embracing how we should be heating and energising our homes in the face of climate crisis and higher energy bills. It is also car-free, instead rely on the availability of sustainable transport choices that are available. To that end, entering into an agreement not to allow residents to gain a parking permit is certainly something my client is happy to entertain. Notwithstanding the low impact of the design, it is acknowledged that concerns have been raised by neighbours, but I would reiterate the proposal will not have a significant visual presence. It will not impact on neighbouring amenity, nor will it harm the character or appearance of the conservation area. In relation to construction of the proposal, the application has been supported by a construction management and logistics plan, and the council's structural engineer also confirms that the proposed development can be safely built without adversely affecting the surrounding natural and built environment. Whilst I do acknowledge that there will be some disturbance during construction, this is unavoidable for any development. Even so, this is not a planning matter for consideration, and therefore this would be an unreasonable reason for refusing the application. Whilst I note the concerns of neighbours, I will stress that the application can and should only be refused on sound planning reasons. Restricted covenants are not a planning consideration. I also object to accusations that the proposal will impact on wildlife, given most of the site is paved. I close by quoting the National Planning Policy Framework, which states that to support the government's objective of significantly boosting the supply of homes, it is important that a sufficient amount and variety of land can come forward where it is needed. As then set out in the London plan, for London to deliver more of the housing it needs, small sites must take a substantially greater contribution to new supply across the city. Therefore, increasing the rate of housing delivery from small sites is a strategic priority. Achieving this objective will require positive and proactive planning by boroughs, both in terms of planning decisions and plan making. With this in mind, I respectfully ask the committee vote as per the officer's recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have Councillor Mike Brunt, who will be speaking on this item for 3 minutes. Mike.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak. We all know that we need housing, and I believe that Abbey Ward as a ward is contributing more to the housing need of the borough than any other ward at the moment because of the redevelopment of the High Path estate. So I don't believe that a small infill like this is making a big difference to the housing need of the area. So I would discount that. I've got concerns about the proximity to neighbours of this property. Why is it 13.5 metres from the donor house, but only 7 metres from a neighbour's house property, given that we've heard that there should be no building within 4 feet of the boundary anyway? So I'm concerned about why it's so far from the house that in the ground that it sits, but close to a neighbour. I've got also concerns about the noise of an underground dwelling. I understand that there's conditions about the pump, the heat pump, and that can be managed, but the ambient noise of having an underground dwelling and the noise that travels through the ground. I live not far from there, and I continually get the noise of the Northern Line coming through my property every time a train goes past, and that's a considerable distance further away. So I'm thinking of, for example, it's so deep, will there be pumps for waste management for the toilets and for pumping water out from showers and things like that? So how much impact will that have on neighbours? So that concerns me. Waste management, it's not on the public highway, it's on a public footpath, but there is space for bins on site, but where will they be collected from? Where's the front curtilage, if you like, for a property down there for Veolia or whoever's collecting to collect the waste? And there is a loss of privacy. This has a tiny outdoor space. It's inaccessible in the first place, as we've heard. So it's down steps to get into it. It's got a tiny outdoor space, but it does have a green roof. So does that green roof get used as an extension of the garden? And if so, anyone sitting on that green roof will be overlooking all the neighbours. So there is a considerable lack of privacy, which I agree there's no windows overlooking anyone else or balconies, but there is the space on the roof. And the closure of the footpath for any period really is unacceptable, because it is a throughway. It avoids a lot of polluted pathways down Merton Road, along Kingston Road, in order to be able to get to Pelham Road. And a lot of people have used it, as we've heard, for many years, but that is a vital lifeline for many people who we're encouraging not to have cars. So I think that the last point that I make in terms of the vehicular access to the site, the Wimbledon Society, I think, raised the point that there should be bollards put at the end to make sure that in future there is no vehicle access down there once the construction's finished, to block it off, because it is wide enough for a vehicle to reverse up there, I think. So that needs to be made absolutely pedestrian proof, but I'm talking now as if it's going to go through. So I would like the committee to really consider seriously whether they wanted to go through in its current location, because it's not actually adding to the area.
Cool. Thank you very much, Mike. So now we turn to Tim to respond to several of those comments, and if I can sort of summarize them into sort of some groupings, but of course there is a lot of detail behind it. So we've got comments particularly from Charlotte about the design aspect, and linking back to the London plan. Fabia talked about the personal circumstances on her as it backs onto her land, particularly about the location where it's built, which was echoed by Mike, and also trees. Jonathan talked about the positiveness of the need to obviously use smaller spaces and how we maximize our overall land supply and how it's green. And then obviously Mike was referring to noise, waste management, and questions of the green roof, but particularly waste management. So can we get any feedback on that? And bollards and the practicalities of bollards, given that I think that's a site we maintain as well, for our own for the biodiversity in that area.
Thank you, Chair. So in regard to, I think covenants were mentioned. So covenants aren't a material planning consideration, so that will be a matter between third parties essentially. If there is a covenant on the land outlining restrictions, that will be a matter between parties, not for the council to be involved with. In terms of inclusive design, it is acknowledged that the dwelling does have steps down into it, but it is just for one dwelling. We're not looking at a large development here to provide lots and lots of flats. So it is a sort of unique building in that sense. So we have to balance that with the idea of keeping the height low, which is done on purpose given the site's location. In terms of the construction plan, so the Highway Authority, so Highways officers have been consulted on this application. They haven't specifically said that the developer can close the pathway. They have said they need to apply for a highways license, and it will be determined at that time with the detail, should planning permission be granted. I think the word precedent was set. Every application is judged on its own merits. What I would say with this site particularly, it is accessed up a public footpath. It's not down a private alleyway into someone's garden, which we do have a lot of those in the borough. In terms of up against the boundary, there is nothing in our policy to say you can't build basements or buildings up to the boundary edge. We have consulted environmental health, and they've recommended conditions on the ground source heat pump to serve the property. In terms of the green roof, so that is not to be used as an outdoor space. We do have a standard condition which will restrict that to be not used as an outdoor space. Forgive me, Chair, if that's not in the conditions, we can add that in. We have a standard condition for that. And in terms of bollards, again, post construction, this is something which the highway officer would have to come from them, should they wish to do that, because it's a public footpath maintained by the highway authority, but that's not been requested. They have acknowledged the access, they acknowledge where it is, but that's not been specifically requested. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim, for addressing those. Yeah, so we had heat pumps, bollards, design. Cool. All right. So this is the section where we open up to the committee members to ask questions. So I'll do 2 rounds, 1 question each, please. 1 question, And then if we have more themes and more issues, then we'll do a third round, but we'll take 3 at a time. So we'll start Dan, we'll do Simon, and we'll do Susie. So Dan first.
Only one question, Chair, only one question. With regards to the trees that would have to be moved in 7.5.2, 2 of them are category C. Can they be replanted somewhere else? Can we make that a condition?
Simon?
Thank you. I wonder if we could have some guidance on gardens, please. In 732, it says that the minimum required space is 50 square meters for external amenity, but this is only 26. And I suppose my question is, what is too small? I mean, if that 26 is just over half, that seems an extraordinary difference between what's put down as the minimum size. So I wonder if we could have some guidance on, what would be too small and where this leaves us in terms of if we wanted to reject on the grounds that the amenity space wasn't big enough, would we be able to do so? Thank you.
Cool, good point. Susie?
Difficult to choose. Many things I would like to ask, but I think one which hasn't been touched on. There's a reference on page 26 to the noise limit, which is described as LA 9010 dB. And I had 2 questions really. How audible is that? Would it be audible to the next door neighbours? And would it be constant?
I think we'll let you off with that one. Yeah, so recapping. So the current condition of the trees, can they be replanted as part of conditions, I believe that was, yeah. 2, what is too small for a garden? And fair questions about noise and how constant it is. And, what's the range, I would say, probably is sort of the sub-question of that.
Thank you, Chair. So taking them in order. So in terms of the trees to be removed, so we have put on a landscaping condition where we can seek replacement tree planting as part of that. So the trees to be removed is 2 category C, 1 to category U, which of the category U is identified as being currently dead, and there's category C of low amenity value. So as part of the landscaping scheme, we can capture sort of mitigation / enhancements on that with the tree planting. There is the outdoor spaces proposed is to be grassed as far as we're concerned. So that's potentially something that could be included within that. In terms of the outdoor space provision, yes, so we do come across this a lot with applications. Not every scheme can provide necessarily the 50 square meters of outdoor space, which is governed by our policy DMD2. So what we have to do, we have to weigh up a judgment with it. We have had in the past some appeal decisions which have been allowed where there's been houses with less than the 50 square meters, for example, and it's a balancing act. With this site, we think on balance it's okay. There's 1 at ground floor level, but there's also 2 at basement level. Albeit would clearly be darker, but there is 1 at ground floor level. So on balance, we consider it to be acceptable. I think Councillor McGrath, you asked about should that be an issue for members this evening, then that's a matter of judgment for you as decision makers. In terms of the noise limitation, so that's come from our environmental health colleagues. So that's their standard noise limitation levels they provide to us for applications where noise could be an issue. So us as planning officers, we don't know exactly how loud that would be, but they have looked at the plans, acknowledged what is proposed, and that's been their recommendation. As to whether it's a constant noise, I wouldn't know, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have another round? I've got a question. So actually, I think this may be Mike's as well. Could you just clarify a bit further on the practicalities of pumping and sewage and water and sort of the ins and outs, the inputs and outputs of the property given its unique design, and then building on what one of the objectors mentioned. I didn't hear an answer to it in response relating to what discussions with the applicant have been made about enhancing that particular alleyway, as it were, about greening or anything further? Does anyone else have another question? Tom.
Just on the public footpath point, I appreciate that it's a matter for highways once the applications, if the application's approved, to grant that access. Presumably, if the access then wasn't granted, then the planning application couldn't then be delivered because there'd there wouldn't feasibly be a way in or out to actually construct the property. Appreciate officers can't comment on the likelihood of whether it's going to be approved or not by highways, but just in your experience of similar development to these, is it ever refused? I suppose would be my question. I appreciate you can't say whether or not this one would be, but it seems appreciate it's not the officer's fault, but it seems a slightly back to front way of doing it to approve a property being built before you know whether you can get the construction traffic in or out to build the property.
Maybe we could take that one away in our improvement plan. Sherry, last question.
Hi, just wanted to say thanks to the objectors who raised their concerns very succinctly and very well, I'd like to say. But I'm sort of minded to ask, following on from the councillor's point, is could we put a condition on the public right of way to sort of address the concerns raised, to include sort of enhancements to the pathway and repairing any damage that may incur? Is that something that we can condition?
Brilliant. So just recapping there, I sort of bring it back to Mike's point about waste, and then obviously Tom's point about access and the order of things, and Sherry Ann's point about, how do you preserve access for the public for that area while probably linking to Tom's point again, while potentially maintaining the ability for someone to construct something?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the actual sort of drainage aspects and how the building would operate in that sense, we do have conditions seeking the further detail for the drainage scheme for the building, which is standard when it comes to basement development, essentially. So in terms of that sense, I don't have the detail off the top of my head in terms of the actual whether there would be a pump to, obviously there's a bathroom at basement level. And obviously to pump that up to the local sewage system. In terms of enhancing the alleyway with greening, really our highway authority, so they've outlined that clearly if it's fairly standard conditions with the sort of highways license, if there's any damage to the highway as part of the development afterwards, they do have to put it back to the standard it was before. In terms of enhancements to the alleyway with greening, I think that's a difficult one because it is just for one 2-bedroom property, which is going to have, based on the plans provided, is going to have limited wider visual impact. So from our point of view, we think that might be sort of unreasonable to add planting down the alleyway for the wider public realm. In terms of Councillor Barlow's point about likely to be approved by highways, to be honest, it's quite a unique situation having a house just accessed off a public footpath. Not unusual, but quite unique. Off the top of my head, unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. Whether highways would say yes in terms of the license for construction. In terms of condition on the public right of way. Again, that would be governed by the highways license in terms of they have to make sure they haven't damaged the footpath, and if they have to put it back to what was there previously, and that is governed by the highway authority essentially. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think we move now to comments and general observations. Does anyone have a view or want to speak on it? Simon and then Susie.
Thank you. I mean, I don't have too many problems with this application, but I do have one fundamental problem, which is we have a local policy that says we should have a minimum size of external amenity space of 50, and this is just over half of that. Now, I can understand the argument that it's a small site, There are other issues. But if that's the case, then we should put that in our policy. We have certainly in the past, as far as I can recall, done this, but there's never been anything that I can recall such a big difference between the minimum size and what's actually proposed. So I would like to propose that we reject this on the grounds that it doesn't meet our own. I mean, I think you said this is a matter of judgment, and we can make this judgment that it doesn't meet our own minimum standard, and therefore we should reject it.
Susie?
When I first looked at this, I thought it's a discreet little house. It's hidden behind a fence. Merton desperately needs houses. What's not to like? But I've gone back to it, and I'm afraid I'm now going to invite everybody to reject this application for a number of reasons. The diminution of amenity for the people who live around it will be significant. We don't know on noise how noisy environmental health considered to be acceptable. We don't know if it's constant. We don't know if the poor unfortunate neighbour next to the heat source pump will have to listen to it day and night. On the gardens, I endorse what Simon says. The approach which says this is a small site, so a small garden is fine, that by that logic, we could have a small site and a garden which is a foot square. And I think in this situation, we should say half is too small. And that's a half which includes, I think, looking at the diagrams, the bike stands for 2 bikes and where the bins are going to be. It is, in Tim's word, tiny, and I think it is too small. The bollard is an issue. The loss of amenity of the footpath is an issue. The conservation officer identifies the loss of garden space as detrimental to the area. And overall, my feeling on this is that the increase in density and the loss of amenity outweighs the benefit of one very small, it is acknowledged, house on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any counters? Stuart and then Sherry.
Thanks, Chair. Just a general comment. I just wanted to say that I think it's really promising to see buildings using cross-laminated timber in Merton. I must admit I have a bit of an interest in the materials. I wrote my master's dissertation on it. But cross-laminated timber is incredibly sustainable, safe, and resident-friendly material to be used, especially compared to concrete. Concrete at the moment makes up about 10% of global emissions, and it is critical that with the trouble that we have in decarbonising concrete, it's such a difficult material to make environmentally friendly, that we take up and encourage sustainable alternatives. And CLT is one of the very best. It's far more environmentally friendly. It allows houses to be built in some cases with almost net zero emissions, in fact, even negative carbon emissions when you consider the full life cycle of the house. But alongside its environmental aspects, also there's a number of other benefits from a construction point of view, not least that it's being constructed off-site and then assembled on-site. This massively minimizes disruption on the site. Usually when you have a building like this, you would need lorries coming back and forth, very polluting lorries, very loud lorries, and heavy machinery to move concrete into place and all the materials you need. CLT allows you to, often many sites, just use power tools so that the construction will be much quieter. Obviously, in this case, we do have an issue with creating basements. There might be issues with that. But in terms of cross-laminated timber, it's a much more favourable way of constructing for the neighbours that will reduce disruption massively on site. So in short, I think we should be welcoming CLT in Merton and encouraging its use. And just finally, I just want to say a quick point on heat pumps. I know there's often a lot of concern about the noise from heat pumps, but generally the consensus is that they're often almost quieter than boilers that we have at the moment. The way they've been designed now, you would not notice it at all to compare to boilers. So if we'd approve a house or approve a home with a boiler, I think we should 100% approve one with a heat pump, and that's not even to mention on why it's so much better environmentally.
Thank you very much for bringing your expertise on this to the committee. Sherry Ann.
Sorry.
Hi. Yes, I just wanted to make a few points. So I don't think that perhaps loss of a private garden that's not publicly accessible, sort of that offers no public benefit, is a reason for refusal to this particular application. And I would say that the area is well served by excellent parks and public spaces that are quite helpful. So we've examined the objections closely, and while some of these are not, unfortunately, material planning considerations, ones that are, I am satisfied in the conditions and revised drawings that have been submitted that these have been addressed to the best of their ability. I'd also just like to say I'm particularly pleased to see that they are implementing passive house standards, something that I would like to see in all future developments, especially smaller ones like this. I also note that future residents of the development would be prevented from applying for a CPZ permit in the local area, sort of helping to allay parking concerns. Although I do note that this site is a PTAL4 and extremely well connected. So I would hope that, the developers would encourage sustainable transport use. And so I just wanted to put those comments on record.
No, thank you very much. I'm also conscious that throughout, colleagues made suggestions to several conditions that will be placed on the site. I think from my note we had, just going back through the notes, I think Dan mentioned about conditioning on the replanting of trees, and then we also had one about from Sherry Ann about what I think this was linking to Tom's point, but I think while we appreciate highways have the kind of the final say with the license, we would want that license to maintain public access if it were to pass. But that are these sort of sensible things that we could add in there, Tim, in enforceable?
The debating chair, sorry for everyone, is if for example, if highways say the footpath has to be closed for safety reasons for the construction process, how does that conflict work with our condition?
I think can I get some nods for the committee? We would, for safety, that's something we would probably accept. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So,
Chair, I think what we will do, I think the best thing to say back to members is we will pursue that condition. If we are informed by the highways officers it is simply not possible, then what we would have to do is press ahead with the decision without that. But we will pursue it as far as we can on behalf of the planning committee if it is achievable.
So then on what we're voting on tonight then is as it is on the paper, but with the two additional conditions, one about tree planting, is that correct, Tim? And the second is, pursuing, barring safety concerns, public right-of-way access to be maintained. And then we've got colleagues who've also vocalised the alternative view. Is that agreed? We're voting on, okay?
Chair, just to clarify on the tree situation, we will make the landscaping condition more robust to specifically require replacements for the category C trees.
Okay, so if that's the issue that we're voting on now, what I'd like to do is ask for those in support of the officer recommendation to raise their hands and agree. Well, thank you.
Chairman, I make that.
Those against?
Or Chairman.
And those not voting?
One, Chairman.
Thank you very much. This application is carried as amended. Thank you very much. I want to thank our public speakers and the applicant for taking the time to add further context to our deliberations as well. I'd like to move on to the next item, which is 43 Woodside in Wimbledon. Tim, would you mind introducing the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application at 43 Woodside is for a change of use and the erection of a garage to a 8-person house of multiple occupation. The site is not located within a conservation area. The house itself, it's a detached dwelling house, so its current lawful use is a single dwelling house, family dwelling house. We understand according to the application form, the HMO has been in occupation since 2019, June 2019. So the application before you seeks to regularise that. So as I said, it is for 8 occupants, as in the description. So on ground floor level, you would have essentially 3 bedrooms, further upstairs, another 3, and then there's 2 within the roof space. The garage would be constructed at the back here, utilising existing drop curb, which is already there. Cycle storage would be provided adjacent within the site in the garden, up against the garage wall. Bin storage is indicated to be at this part of the site at the front and down the side of the house. The garage itself, so sort of simple brick construction with a flat roof with an overhang which goes over the bike storage area. Some site photographs. So this is the detached house here, very large and grand in its appearance. There's the existing drop curb here, so the garage would essentially go adjacent to this the neighbouring garage here. So members, I draw attention really to first of all, the principles of the application. So the principle of a change of use from a dwelling house to house and multiple occupation is acceptable in principle. It's a form of permanent accommodation, largely targeting at people who can't afford to get on the property ladder or rent perhaps a 1-bed flat on their own. It is for 8 occupants only. That is what's proposed. The application would be subject to also a permit-free agreement to reduce the impact on car parking in the surrounding CPZ. The garage would obviously be there, so should one of the occupants seek to utilise that garage for a car, that would be perfectly acceptable. Members, I draw attention to the modification sheet. So in the committee briefing, the question was raised to the floor about the background to the application as outlined in the applicant's application form. It's been a HMO since June 2019, and there's some further detail there about how they came about to applying for planning permission to regularise the current use. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim. I believe we've got a public speaker and the applicant as well. Polly Joseph from Wera, are you on the?
Yes.
Yeah, you're on the line. Brilliant. You've got 3 minutes, Polly.
Good evening. As you've been shown on the plan, 43 Woodside is a corner plot on the junction of Woodside and Worcester Roads. I'm speaking on behalf of the Residents Association, Wimbledon Eastside Hillside Residents Association, because the chair is unwell. The Residents Association believes that a large HMO of 8 single households in this location is unsuitable, as the area mainly comprises family dwelling houses. Extending the use of such properties to large HMOs will further adversely change the character of the neighbourhood from a community to a more transient population. The planning officer notes in paragraph 7.9 of his report that there are no other large HMOs in the immediate vicinity, that is, with 6 or more residents where planning is required. However, it ignores 2 houses at 46 and 44 Worcester Road that are on the other side of the junction and are on the council's own HMO register. Whilst they are not large HMO, i.e. requiring planning, they are permitted a maximum of 5 single households in each property. So if this planning application is granted, there will be 18 HMO single households in 3 houses located at the junction of Woodside and Worcester Road. The Residents Association consider this will have a detrimental impact on the neighbourhood. Further, the use of the property and garden by so many households can lead to excessive noise and disturbance. We understand that such a complaint was made to the council earlier this year. The application includes a new pedestrian garden side entrance in a new wall along Worcester Road, shown on the plan earlier. This is not mentioned in the officer's report, but the Residents' Association consider it is in an unsuitable location as it is opposite the entrance to Willington School Nursery. Turning to the proposed accommodation, the shared kitchen diner seems unable to accommodate 8 households at the same time, and we have concern for only 3 bathrooms for 8 households. For these reasons, we urge the committee to reject the application, which we consider will have a negative impact. It is, of course, open to the applicant to operate an HMO that does not require planning permission, as it is currently doing or perhaps has done in the past. If nevertheless the committee is minded to grant planning permission for a large HMO, we note the officer's suggested conditions for a parking-free agreement, the requirement for the construction materials to be approved, and for the refuse arrangements to be approved, noting that those shown on the drawing, which are fenced off in a narrow passage, are inadequate and will lead to rubbish being left on the ground, attracting more foxes in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Polly, for taking the time to speak to us this evening. And we now also have Harinder Kuna, the applicant, to speak as well. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Harinder Kuna and I own the property, and I've owned it for 25 years and have maintained it to a very high standard. The proposal is to convert the property located at 43 Woodside into an 8-bed HMO. As you have seen on the attached plans, the position of the property is strategic. It is 600 meters away from the train station and has a number of bus stops nearby. The area doesn't have any restrictions related to conservation or Article 4 areas, and this development would be meeting an identified local need as it aims to provide affordable accommodation and would meet the needs of different types of households. The property is a detached house with a front yard and a large rear garden of around 100 square meters. It will not require any additional works as it already includes 8 generous-sized bedrooms with a good mix of en-suites and shared bathrooms totaling 5 cloakrooms and 4 bathrooms. All rooms to be used as single occupancy, even though they are far larger than the local minimum standard. The property also has a very large communal space. The kitchen and dining area is very large, and there is also a large outdoor amenity space. We understand that the number of proposed occupants might be a concern, but please let me reassure you that the property is already designed to host 8 people, so there will be no increase in terms of occupancy. Furthermore, as the tenants and neighbours' well-being is highly valued, the aim is to always have the right tenants in the property. The tenant profile is that of young professionals and key workers, for example, restaurant managers, NHS workers, IT professionals, accounting practitioners, just to name some, who cannot afford to rent a flat in the town centre and so would find it much more convenient to rent more affordable accommodation within a reasonable travelling distance of their workplace and the town's amenities. To find the right tenants, a specialised company, a leading co-living operator, is being used. Due to the types of jobs and contracts, the tenants will be in the property for up to a year and perhaps more, and potentially some individuals may decide to settle in the area and continue to remain part of the community once they can afford different accommodation to meet the changing needs. In general, the main concerns regarding HMOs are related to parking, potential noise, and disturbance and security. With regards to parking, the property already offers 1 off-street parking space, which is provided in the new garage as well. And as mentioned earlier, it is extremely well connected to public transport. The proposal is also aimed to attract tenants who are willing to walk, to cycle, and to use public transport rather than using cars. With regards to potential noise and security, and given that the house is a detached building and the occupants will be likely to spend most of the time working, the level of noise and disturbance is not expected to increase. There will be security cameras provided at the main entrance points in order to work as a deterrent and to improve the safety of the occupants. So the reasons why this property will attract the right tenants and offer quality development are the following. Generously sized bedrooms, ranging in size from 11 to 19 square meters.
Your time is up, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for taking the time to outline that. Apologies, I had to cut you off there. So We have heard from the objectors. We've got no councillors speaking on this. Tim, I'd like to bring you back in to address the queries raised, particularly around what's particularly interesting in this one for me is Polly's point about HMOs, what is and what isn't in policy, given the wider strategy of HMOs in the council as well, issues of noise and such as well. Is it building control in terms of the number of bathrooms per occupant? And then Inda's point about, this is providing affordable accommodation in an area that otherwise needs, how does this align with the local demand and need profile?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so, well, first of all, with HMOs, it's a form of permanent residential accommodation, which is generally speaking, often obviously cheaper to rent an individual room than it is to rent a one-bed flat. So in terms of sort of affordability, it does help meet a specific need and demand. The officers set that out within the detail of the report, referring to some of the research documents backing up the local plan, for example. So I think that referred to the market assessment, strategic market assessment there. In terms of the number of bathrooms and sort of looking at the size of the bedrooms and also the size of the general communal amenity space in the house, we have been guided by the HMO. Merton have a 2021 adopted HMO requirements guidance document. Now that's for people specifically applying for their licenses, but we can cross-reference that into planning to say, in looking at the plans, is it generally in conformity with that guidance, which the officers looked at it and it is. So there's a noise and disturbance. I think, yeah, with 8 individuals coming and going to work, etc., it's bound to have maybe a bit more noise and disturbance, for example. But for example, there may not be children there, so in terms of won't be children screaming in the garden, for example, or less likely. So more adults. But Chair, it is also everyone is governed by the environmental legislation in terms of people reporting nuisances, and it can be investigated that way should that become an ongoing problem. So not to do with planning. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's helpful. Colleagues, questions? Martin, Jill, and then Dan.
My question obviously is in relation to refuse and recycling details CP submitted. Why wasn't this submitted as part of the application, which is before us today? Because obviously one of the big concerns about HMO is the level of refuse bins and recycling, and this has been an issue in many areas with local residents. I'm obviously disappointed that obviously this information is an add-on afterwards rather than being part of the substantive application. Obviously, if you could expand further why that is the case.
It's a fair question, Jill.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned and unclear in terms of the true expectation of whether there will actually only be a maximum of 8 people living in this accommodation, because unless you're actually only renting to nuns and monks, I would imagine many people might be couples or indeed have relations. And so we're not talking about necessarily 8 people maximum, which at its worst could be potentially 16 people, and whether the accommodation and the shared amenities actually could really be sufficient for that kind of usage, and including all the extra bin storage. Thank you.
Good point. And Dan.
I just had a question on paragraph 7.15. I think it cuts off at the very end. The sentence at the end of the paragraph, it is therefore considered that the proposed, I think, is incomplete. What was that bit to say?
Good question. So just to recap from the top, give you a second, Tim, to get to 7.5. So obviously, point about refuge. We talked about this in our technical briefing. Big concerns, I know in Pollard's Hill, when we got smaller sort of nature modes, this is a big concern as well. Jill's point about what is actually regarded as an occupant, so the true occupancy rate, and 7.1, paragraph 7.1, clarity on the point that was making in the paper.
Thank you, Chair. Starting with the paragraph 7.15, this was brought to my attention late this afternoon by a colleague, so thanks for raising it. But I do have some sort of a verbal continuation of that sentence, if I may, Chair. So rather than the word proposed, we can cross that out and put proposal should be car-free and is to be secured via a Section 106 agreement. This is reflected in the recommendation. So that essentially was the conclusion to that paragraph. So apologies, that's not in there. In terms of refuse and recycling, so it is something that we can reasonably condition through planning. We looked at this, the house is detached, there's a lot of space around it, there's space down both sides of the property, for example. So we have sort of condition on it, which we can then consult our waste officer in-house. What we can do, given concerns, it might be good to seek something a bit more secure than just the wheelies on their own. You can get these storage, outdoor storage facilities for bins, so we can look at that. In terms of the maximum number of people, 8, so it is for 8 occupants. I appreciate there may be some occasions when people stay around who aren't part of the, I guess, the lease for the building, but it is 8 in the description and proposed, and so should a complaint come in saying there's more than that living there, then that can be investigated by planning enforcement essentially, but it is governed by the description and the plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Good short answers there. Second round. Anyone else? Simon? I saw Ed, you last time you had your hand up. So Simon, Ed, and anyone else? Nope. Go for it. And Susie. Simon.
Very quickly, on 715, the sentence doesn't end. It just says, it's therefore considered that the proposed. And we just answered that. You just answered that. I'm sorry. I apologize.
All right. You can have another go in a second if you want. Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Really, just along the lines of Councillor Manley's question about only 8 occupants, what enforcement powers does Merton have? Certainly in my experience in property and coming across properties like this, it does, I haven't come across one where there's been a single bed in every bedroom. There's often been bunk beds, never mind a double bed, and just 8 people seems, I'm not sure, I haven't worked out what the rent would be on its own, but I do wonder if this is actually a house that might have far more than 8 people actually going to live in it. Thank you.
It's a fair point. And Susie.
Thank you. Looking at the map, can I just clarify and confirm that we've got 43, which is going to have 8 people or possibly more in it. Directly opposite, we've got 46 Worcester Road and 44 Worcester Road. And I've done some research onto this. Can you just confirm to me, do you know how many people, it's a maximum of 6, isn't it, for each of those properties? Because they're C3 or 4. Okay, so that's maximum of 12 people opposite and 8 or whatever actually happens in Woodside as well. So we're looking at possibly 20, possibly more people on that corner with 3 houses directly opposite one another. That's quite a concentration of HMOs, is it not?
So just to recap, so Ed's point, I mean, ultimately they're all the same point. So we're talking about here, what is the link between planning and the housing enforcement? It'd be good clarity. And is there what's the precedent or conditions that could be internally imposed potentially to strengthen that relationship? Whether, is there mandatory checks or within 6 months hypothetically? And then Susie's point about density, how does that relate in terms of what do we take into consideration? Bearing in mind, as far as I'm aware, obviously the ones which aren't 8, don't need to go through the licensing process. So it'd be good to get some clarity on that.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the concerns about the number of occupants, so just to clarify, so obviously it is in the description, it's governed by that in terms of 8 occupants. The colleagues just quite rightly pointed out that there would also be in breach of their license, the HMO license as well. So there's quite a few channels in terms of moving forward. If there is someone wishes to report more occupants, there's planning enforcement for breach of planning. There's the HMO license they can discuss the council report that with that breach of license, but also environmental health for noise and disturbance and things like that. In terms of the concentration of HMOs, I mean, no, I wouldn't say that is a high concentration, to be honest. It is largely an area of family housing or residential individual flats. I think some of the key issues arise with HMOs where it does come to lots and lots of terrace properties in HMOs where you do have there is no bin storage other than at the front, right outside the front door. So that's when those issues become arise. But no, I wouldn't say that's a high concentration of HMOs having two opposite there. In terms of conditions, Chair, I mean, as I said, they are governed with the description of development. So I don't think we can add any further conditions in terms of the number of occupants, really. Yeah, John, unless you have anything to add.
Apologies, just some rediscussions about conditions, 30 seconds.
Chairman, I would just say that just going back to the questions in general and reinforcing the conditions, we can and are recommending a condition that the development is well, there's the description for 8 only. We can reinforce that just to remind the applicant in an informative that it is a maximum of 8 and no more. And we can condition the implementation of the development entirely in accordance with the plans, which will show the 8 rooms there. In terms of enforcement, the officers of the council, if we do get complaints, if we are receiving evidence that there are a lot more than 8 people going into that property regularly, we have powers of entry that we can use, and we turn up on spec and we can go into that property and see exactly how it's laid out. And then we have a whole enforcement toolkit that we can revert to and identify what is the most appropriate means, depending on the exact situation, of bringing that development in line with the terms of this planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go into comments now. Does anyone want to start us off at all? So we've got Jill, Ed, and then Susie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I find it very difficult to accept the argument of external density. I think we have to live in a real world that HMOs are going to increase because there is a lack of housing, whether we like it or not. So I don't think it's really an acceptable argument. Internal density is another thing because that's about quality of life and quality of maintaining a decent standard of the internal housing and common parts behavior in terms of how waste is disposed of. So I'm minded to say yes to this application, but with a very strong recommendation to the applicant that there better not be too many extra people permanently being granted licenses to live there. Of course, we will have friends that come and go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Very similar. I think with strict conditions, I'm minded to go along that way as well. But with strict conditions on 8 people, that's it. And refuse.
I was going to mention refuse in my comment, but good point, Susie.
I'm not going to recommend accepting this one, I'm afraid. I endorse what my colleagues have said, but I also think that this is the proximity of these 3 houses, this one as an 8-bedroom HMO and the 2 opposite as 6 potentially bedroom HMOs, is an awful lot of houses of multiple occupation in a very tiny area. Merton has 0.55% of houses of multiple occupation. The London average is 1.8, but so I accept that Merton needs to have more, but the officer accepts in his report, in effect, that too high a concentration of HMOs is detrimental to the neighbourhood. And this is detrimental to the neighbourhood, in my view, detrimental for the neighbours in terms of their quality of living conditions. If you suddenly have, or if you continue to have, a very large group of transient people living in one very small area. So on that basis, I'm not going to agree to this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susie. Sherry-Ann?
Just a quick final comment from me. Whilst I do appreciate that HMO is not the best solution to a housing crisis, I think, and while we would all love to build more single family homes and all of that would be great. I do recognize that HMOs are great for young people moving into London and needing somewhere cheaper accommodation to stay. Unfortunately, we all can't sort of rent studio flats or 1-bedroom flats or 2-bedroom flats. It's just simply unaffordable. So whilst I do appreciate and I hope that the seriousness of the conditions that we hope to place on this application, will be carried out. I think that HMOs are a great solution, are a good solution to a very serious problem in London, which is a housing shortage, as well as long as they're well managed. So I just wanted to say that.
No, thank you. I mean, just briefly echoing everyone's concerns about the management side. I mean, we all heard stories of density and people's living conditions and rental accommodation. I mean, it's good from a conditional perspective. John talked about reinforcing that in the conditions in terms of the age. We also being quite strict on the plan itself and powers of entry. Again, we probably be worth maybe just having a line from our internal team on that for reassurance for the committee separately. But it's good that we would want to seek that. I think the only thing I would want to see strengthen a bit more in a condition is, and I'll take colleagues' view on this, is the refuge issue. So the bins outside, to make sure that they're not wheelie bins, that they are, where possible, capable of, if there is a higher occupancy for a shorter rate, they are capable of holding the waste needed. And this may also take into consideration there may be a higher turnover occupancy that the landlord's optimistic view of that would hold. So that way, we know those roads in our communities where unfortunately the capacity just isn't there at the minute. We don't want this to be one of them if we do indeed grant this today. Is that possibility to add that on?
We can certainly condition a scheme, Chairman. We can do that, and we can refer the details that come into the waste team and make them aware of the committee's views on that when they come back with their decision on acceptability. So we can go through that process and achieve the best solution. But happy to raise all of that with the waste team and secure the details accordingly under the terms of a planning condition.
Super. So that would be what we're voting on. Jill, final question.
Sorry, Chair, just to clarify, are we in placing a condition that sufficient space is allocated for more than the minimum expectation of rubbish bins, so that they can't be argued, oh, there's not enough space for 8 bins when we could have asked for it? Yeah, okay, thank you.
That, yeah, it may be a big bin, but basically there's enough to hold the waste that's coming out from it. Cool. So that's what we'll be voting on this one, colleagues. So as before, the question on the order paper, all those hands up in favour of the recommendation by officers to grant this application? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Chairman.
All those against, draw answer.
2, Chairman.
All those not voting?
1, Chairman. That doesn't add up, does it? Was it 7 rather than 6?
Can we just, for the record, confirm? So all those in favour of the question on order paper?
7 in favour, Chairman.
Super duper. So it all tallies. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for those joining us online. Really appreciate your time this evening. So we're going to move on to the next item. So that's item 9. So that's Lancaster Road. We have one speaker. So that's Councillor Max Austin, but I believe we may or may not be hearing from Max, but let me just clarify in a second. Tim, would you mind just introducing the property?
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application is at 9 Lancaster Road in Wimbledon Village. It's currently a semi-detached 2-storey dwelling house. It's accessible down it's a small cul-de-sac serving several properties. This property is particularly at the very end of the cul-de-sac. The proposal itself is for extensions to the dwelling house. So we're looking at a first floor rear extension and replacement ground floor extension to the dwelling, and also slight alterations to the existing rear dormer windows. So I'll run through the plans. So here we have the essentially proposed ground floor plan. As you see, sort of at the back, it's replacing an existing one. It's going slightly deeper. At first floor level, here we go. So comparison between existing at the top and first floor below. At first floor, it's being pushed out about 1.5 meters to create a larger bedroom and bathroom there. And also with existing roof is already converted, they're extending that within the same hip at the top there and altering some of the dormers here. So this is quite a useful comparison between existing at the top and proposed. As I said, the first floor, the tiles and the hip is all to match the existing. At ground floor level, this would be removed to be replaced with another one. As I said, slightly deeper than the existing, and the dormer window is slightly amended to account for the hip coming out. So again, existing proposed. This is the western side elevation. You just see dotted outline in green the existing building. So as I said, the first floor coming out. The single-story rear is slightly staggered in height, so it's lower on the sides than it is in the central section. So here at the top's existing. So here that's what I mean. So that the height of the side sections will actually match the same height as existing, and then central it will be slightly higher. Just adds a bit of variation. Glass doors at ground floor level. The dormer window, as I said, at the top altered to allow for the hip roof to come out. On-site pictures from the case officer. So this is at the back. So this would be removed and replaced, along with up here. The first floor would come out this side. Looking both sides, the adjoining neighbour does have a single-story rear extension, and the proposal would come out slightly deeper than that. This side, some rear gardens to properties here, but given the separation distance and the distance of the first floor rear extension, we're happy with that future relationship here. That's just an outlook towards the rear from the case officer to the side. To that house doesn't have any side. First floor windows, and there's also another house to the left, to the west, which hands itself to the side of the garden here on the site. Overall, Chair, officers are happy with the extensions proposed, considered to be suitable to the conservation area, and would not cause harm to neighbouring community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. We've got Max Austin to speak on this item. Max, good to have you here. You got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me, and I'm sorry I couldn't make it there in person owing to the train issues tonight. Together with Councillor Howard, I visited the property at the request of the neighbouring constituent, and we met with 3 residents who have submitted written objections alongside an objection from Clarion. And very interesting to see your images of this property. The thing that it omits is what's happening out the front. And it is really important to understand the scale of the site in question. Lancaster Place is a small cul-de-sac with just enough space for 4 to 5 cars to be parked, with a small green out the front, which is being used for vehicles to turn around on. And residents have expressed their concerns, which Councillor Howard and I believe are fully reasonable, that any works that are undertaken will be reliant on the daily use of heavy goods vehicles, which will impact materially on the accessibility of the cul-de-sac for other residents. Should the application be approved, we request that you give very serious consideration to the impact of a lengthy building period on this small road. 10 dwellings share the same narrow entrance road at 4 meters wide there is little room for a car to pass another car, and in order to provide enough parking space, for cars to enter the road, cars are already parked partly on the pavement. So it's a very small space, that access road. Each of the 10 homes has its own requirements in terms of work-related or food deliveries, emergency plumbers, electricians, meaning that constant access to this road is essential. And I would also like to highlight that there is also a need for unhindered and in some cases rapid access for ambulances and carers. I have also been asked to highlight too that not all of the cul-de-sacs residents enjoy, sadly, the best of health and will likely require such care. I'd like to propose that should this application be approved, for the reasons I've just set out, a construction management plan which respects the rights of other residents to quiet enjoyment and protects the cul-de-sac from being taken over and turned into a builder's yard for what would be quite a significant period of time. Thank you very much.
Max, thanks very much for that and passing on your residents' concerns, and thank you for taking the time to do that this evening. Tim, is there anything you would want to come back on particularly about the current thoughts about the construction management plan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in my discussions with the case officer on this application, we're looking through representations. We do acknowledge the concerns. Ordinarily, for a scheme of this size, we wouldn't seek details of the construction process for home extensions. However, given the concerns raised and is at the end of the cul-de-sac, we have imposed on condition 9 in the report before you, which does seek details of the parking of vehicles for construction process. So we do have condition 9. We can never fully mitigate against the impact of a building period, but what we can do is seek the details in the condition 9 to assist with that issue. So, Chair, that's the sort of answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Questions on this one, colleagues? No, Ed, and then Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I'm familiar with the site. Is it possible for other members of the panel just to see maybe a Google Street View? Because I mean, I know what it's like, and I think it's good we're taking this on board. But it is. Sorry, I should have probably emailed you quickly to ask for it up there. But good to see. Thank you.
Time, Tom.
Sorry, it doesn't help you having time finding it, because I was going to ask the exact same question.
I mean, so I had a question then. What is, I think, sometimes we go into the detail of this and sometimes just stay macro, but in this particular, and because you're looking at Street View, it's quite helpful actually to show the surrounding roads as well. What is a helpful ask of the possible in terms of maintaining access to that small road? Because I saw it on Street View too, and it was really interesting. You can see now the accessibility of cars. Stuart?
I was just going to ask, yeah, I mean, obviously I can see, I can appreciate that it is a very narrow road access there, but it mentions this kind of plan, this construction plan. I mean, I imagine, we must see projects like this, that happened in cul-de-sacs areas like this. What would a construction plan actually look like? How much can you actually mitigate against issues like that? So what kind of provisions could be put in place to help alleviate that?
That's a good question. Any others on that one? No? Oh, Ed, yeah.
I'm just going to ask about conditions to look after that green area afterwards. There's bound to be some damage there from lorries and things. It'd be good if it could be reinstated afterwards.
Cool. So one environmental, one on the building itself. It'd be good to hear that.
Chair, thank you. So in regard to condition 9, so what it does is just seeks to really try and secure the arrangements for construction in terms of parking and vehicles. For a scheme of this size, we actually don't anticipate very many large vehicles being needed really down there. I think there is, you can see the site does have a fairly decent driveway just by looking on Street View. Now, in terms of conditioning the grass there to be maintained. What I would say, Chair, I believe it's outside the red line application boundary. No, I think what. It's outside the green. This bit is outside the public highway ownership.
Chair, just to clarify, are we looking at the grassed area to the front of the properties there, or were we looking at the grass strip immediately adjacent to the left-hand side of Lancaster Road?
I thought pretty much that one.
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
where you are there, just to the right of the driveway, as we look at it.
Chairman, the strip of land in question is outside of the application site, which restricts our ability to impose a condition to affect that in case. I mean, the benefit of that is that any damage to that would be a third-party civil issue that could be resolved that way. I think the best we can achieve there is to point out the need to protect that by way of an informative on the decision notice.
I think that's fair as an informative.
Thank you.
Final one from Tom.
Just on the same point, actually, for an interesting that in Clarion's response in the papers, they say they haven't received any requests to use that space as part of the construction. Is that usual that wouldn't have happened before the application was brought forward? And it's sort of similar to the first item, really. Again, it seems if it's completely impractical for the work to happen because the permission might not be granted to use what is clearly already a very tight space in front of the property, it seems we could, the committee could well approve it, and then we could find that actually it's not practical for the work to take place because there is no sufficient access in or out. I appreciate what you said, there is a driveway there, but that's still a very small space for construction traffic.
Yeah, please jump in.
Thank you, Chairman. So in terms of land ownership, there is a process to go through and a requirement to make a planning permission valid in terms of serving notice and certificates on landowners within the application site, but not outside. So again, I think we elaborate in an informative on the decision notice to say that we've had a representation affecting immediately adjacent land, and that the applicant is strongly advised to seek agreement and appropriate arrangements prior to the commencement of development to ensure that this permission is achievable.
Super. So now moving on to any comments. Anyone want to add anything further? I think, I mean, the only point I just want to add is just echoing what we said on the floor and Max's point about appreciate we don't want to go too much into the minutiae of the detail, but I would say that having a process where we can check up on the enforcement of keeping that site clear as much as possible, definitely using their own drive as much as possible, given the concerns in the area, and accessibility for any emergency vehicles would be as helpful as possible. But I appreciate this also needs to be practical, given there will be times of heavy use and then times of underuse as well. So I think it's just maybe circulating that at least to the committee as well, the plan for the construction, so that at least there's peace of mind as well, and definitely to Max and his colleagues.
We can certainly do that, Chairman. We can circulate the document for comments. Yes, I was just going to ask the question actually before the last point you made. Would you like that to be in consultation with the members of the planning committee or the ward members, or both?
I think if I think as well, ultimately the committee is the deciding body. I think it's so we have the final say on it. But I think it's worth just making sure that the ward councillors are aware that the management plans reflecting the views of the residents as best as possible. So I'm happy to take a lead on that, and any other member wants to get involved by all means. So that's a condition we can add on that. Cool. All right. So moving to the question as is on the order paper with the amendments as we've just discussed. Can I get hands in favour? Against? 0. Not voting?
1.
There you go. Okay. Super. All right. So I'm conscious we're reaching our 1.5 hours. We've also got one more housing application to go. So we're doing really great here. Could we just hold our break for 10 minutes and it is? Good. So Oriole House. So I think Stuart is correct. Is that one of yours? No, it's not. It's Tim. It's one of yours too. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application is at 26 The Grange within Wimbledon Village. You have Wimbledon Common just to the north. You can just see it off plan. The application follows, you'll note in your papers, follows a previous refused application under delegated authority and subsequently dismissed at planning appeal. I did circulate earlier today the appeal decision for that application and the refused basement plan as part of that application, just to assist members this evening. So the proposal is to extend the property in a similar fashion to the previous application. So we have first floor extensions here, removing existing ground floor extensions and replacing it with a flat roof ground floor extension with roof lights. New landscaping at the front and paving and landscaping to the garden. The proposal now includes a basement again, but it is much reduced in size. So in comparison to the previously dismissed appeal, which we'd have seen the plan today, it has been much reduced in size. And that was the main reason for the refusal under the previous application, was the size and scale of the basement, which did go out the back here and right to the side, which we consider to be harmful to the locally listed building, and the inspector supported us on that. So now it's a matter of judgment that's been reduced in size. We find it now acceptable. You'll note in the report the technical consultees have been consulted on the application, such as the flood risk officer, conservation officer, and structural engineer in terms of the basement. Who are happy, subject to conditions, seeking the further final detail. So looking through some of the plans, as I say, large house at first floor level, so sort of bedrooms, 6 bedrooms throughout. The architect's done some comparisons with the there is a previous approval for extensions to the house, not including a basement. Which is essentially what they're looking to do here at first floor and above. This was just the comparison between garden sizes, garden area for the basement calculations. We had a disagreement with them at the appeal on this issue, but now that the basement's been much reduced in size, that issue falls away. Some new gates at the front as well to serve the house. So as I said before, single-story sort of orangery style extensions at the back proposed. The basement light wells have been removed from the front following comments from our conservation officer and also the original basement carport, which was proposed, that has been now removed and is now given over to more garden space. So in terms of the basement, it's largely underneath the house. It does come out a little bit, but would largely not be visible. Some site pictures on the site looking towards the front from within the garden. As I said, this would be removed and replaced with more modern extensions. The boundary wall would remain. This is at the back. So there's a modern addition over time. Neighbouring property, so say the boundary wall slightly lower this side, but does go around the site. From the front, it's been sealed off with construction hoarding. As outlined previously, the building is locally listed, so it's not statutorily listed, but a building of merit recognised by Merton. So you'll note in the report that overall we're now satisfied that the essentially reduction in basement size has now made the scheme acceptable in comparison to the previous dismissed scheme by the planning inspector. So there's no, sorry Chair, there is one modification, which is a further safeguarding condition to do with archaeology recommended from the conservation officer, but subject to that, recommend permission be granted. Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much for the helpful overview, given the complexity of this case of the previous application as well. So we've got no public speakers. Are there any questions at all from the committee? One from Dan, anyone else? Dan.
I just noticed in the feedback section from the public, they mentioned there's been a lot of similar work being done with regards to building large basements in this area. And is the cumulative impact of diverting known underground streams considered when these kind of applications? I understand each application has been considered on its own and on its own merits, but are the cumulative effects of the wide area considered? And what would be your response to that?
Is that, sorry, is that from like a seismic ground type survey, or yeah, okay. Cool, good point. And Sherry.
Yes, I just saw that there was a nice request for Swift boxes on the application. So if that's something that can be added in, I'm sorry, I didn't see it in the conditions. Normally it's in there. Sorry if I've misread that.
So we've got from Dan, the sort of how do we take from the wider sort of, you know, the seismic and water streams into consideration, and Sherry was an environmental addition to that as well.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of basement development, so we do rely upon our technical experts with this issue. So we have consulted a flood risk officer and structural engineer when it comes to looking at basements. The flood risk officers are aware there's a scheme 2 doors up which had a basement development, which I know is under construction. I think it has been for a couple of years now. So there has been some basement development in the area, but we do rely upon them, their knowledge, to be looking at potential cumulative effects. I think it should be noted that in the appeal decision, the inspector did go into the drainage issues on the basement. That basement was much larger, and he didn't raise an objection on those grounds. So for this particular case, we have to acknowledge that it is much reduced, but that issue is covered off with the technical expertise there. And the Swift boxes, yes, we do add an informative with the Swift boxes request. We don't add condition for that, but we do put an informative on. They do comment on most of the applications we get in the borough, the Swift group. Thank you.
Okay, so any further questions before we go to comments? Comments? Anyone want to add anything? No, super. So do we feel strongly enough about Swift boxes and putting a condition on? Do we want to, is there a view to have a Swift box condition?
Yeah, Chair, we have it as informative number 2 already
Oh,
on,
okay,
on the
so it's
agenda.
already.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Good.
what I thought.
Just wanted to, yeah, we've got that. Super. All right. So if there's no further additions there, so voting on the question as it is on the order paper. Those in favour of the application?
H, Chairman.
Voting against?
None, Chairman.
Not voting?
2, Chairman.
Super. Thanks very much. So we will now take a brief, say, 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 9:15. Thanks very much. Good evening again, everyone. Back from our short break. So we are now going to go to item 9. So that's the Hadley Road community allotment. Could we have the item introduced, please?
Thank you, Chair. The site is the Hadley Road allotments. The address is New Barnes Avenue, but the access is here from Hadley Road. And the site itself is marked in red. It is the hard standing area. Site. This is the approach from Hadley Road. The gates and fence, which are subject to a separate application, would later be removed. And you can see just past the gates here is the hard standing area where the proposal will be. Now, the proposal is to use this hard standing and 66 square meters of additional hard standing around it to provide a single story building for a toilet with a septic tank and vent, for a workshop as well, and a little outside area for community use within the allotment group and for local group education. This is another shot of the site with some deliveries. Just general views back within the allotment area. Again, this is back towards the extent of where the structure is going to be. The neighbour to the side, that shows the closest residential neighbour to where the toilet will be. This is the structure itself. It's a one-story building with a 3-stage flat roof. Polycarbonate walls are made of compacted mud on a timber frame. Another shot of it there. It's going to have a little outside barbecue area. That's it in plan form. You can see the 3 forms of the roof that will overlap and cover the area. This is a little bit of new hard standing that's going to go here and here that comprise the extra land for it. The facility will be used to be supervised by the National Trust, who are going to do an educational program. They currently do one with about 12 kids a week on that. The plan is to expand that to local schools and possibly onto the local medical centre and through moat housing to provide facilities. Details of what that will involve are a little bit limited at the moment, but that's the long plan, and use one or two of the plots within the site to deliver that. And that would be it. Yes, well, it is recommended for approval subject to the conditions that are listed. The conditions have been formulated to address a number of issues that were raised by the objectors. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee. So we don't have any public speakers or the applicant speaking on this tonight. So we'll go direct to councillor questions. Who wants to go first? So Jill. Anyone else? Susie. Go, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. I am slightly perturbed, being a great lover of allotments and user of allotments. People get very attached and they're well loved and well tended by 99% of the users and plot holders. And I'm concerned that it would appear that there's a bit of a lack of communication going on between the plot holders and whoever is operating this site, in that the applicant was given notices to hand out to the plot holders in order to notify them of this work. But there doesn't seem to be any proof that that was done. And I see there was supposed to be a site notice too, but these are not necessarily spotted or indeed last very long where they're posted. So I think what concerns me is, who is the legal structure that is asking for this application, on whose authority? And I know probably maybe that isn't even a planning consideration unless the actual applicant hasn't got full permission to ask for this application. So if someone could just clarify, because I'm really concerned on behalf of the plot holders. Thank you.
That's a fair question. And Susie?
I was simply going to say that last time when this was deferred, I had reservations about it from the perspective of the allotment holders, very much like my friend. But having seen the conditions which have been revised and extended, I'm very happy to support this. It looks like a very positive thing.
Thank you. Did anyone else have a question? No. So I think Jill's point is very valid. Like, who, who is, because given the borough owns the actual allotment as well, it's managed. Who owns the responsibility for this? Who is the applicant in some respects?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The applicant's Councillor Henry on behalf of the Allotment Association. There were officer concerns about the way that this was being consulted upon. They were asked to provide details of the allotment holders. That was declined under freedom of information, data protection, that we couldn't have their details. And so my best option was to individually write the letters to be handed out, and insisted that it got added to their website and the sites got up, which is as much as I could do.
Jill's got a question, maybe to come back on that one. I may as well.
Well, yeah, I feel that we're a little bit hamstrung, and with no disrespect to Councillor Henry at all, but you know, I need to be satisfied that process is process. Now, everything else is fine as far as I'm concerned, the application, but I am possibly desirous of a deferment to absolutely button down, because you see, it comes to the question that if we are not clear at this point who's in full command of what's going on when it comes to the actual management and future running, and who, you know, is in charge of security, etc., etc. If the council then becomes involved in any kind of nuisance or noise or whatever, anything like that, parking, who are we going to? I'm just, you know, on the nervous side. That's all.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, my question, did anyone else have another quick note? All right, my question adding on that is, what could we do in conditions to strengthen that? And what preconditions could we get to do that, given also the reality that we are, in effect, the applicant too in this? Because while it's the allotment association that will be using that, it is our land, correct me if I'm wrong, on that. And then it's how do we manage that situation going forward to de-risk both issues to the allotment holders, but also us as a borough as well being pulled into that.
Yeah, I mean, that has been an issue with trying to get where we were on this. It was a council property, and I understand that the allotment association with Councillor Henry are taking over the management of it. So with perhaps something from the legal department on how that's going to work as to who becomes the ultimate responsibility or responsible person for any enforcement action that needed to be taken over it. But I do agree with your comments on the issue with the consultation of plot holders. I personally would have felt happier with that having been more in control of, shall we say.
Can we, I think...
Sorry, can I just come back and say, have we seen a constitution for the allotment association? We have. Have we? No. And if we were to actually see the constitution, would we then be satisfied that due process is taking place on behalf of the members of that group?
I think these are all valid points, and I think these would need to be part of a condition, so that officers would and or also us as a committee be informed of those interested to see have these conditions been met before the spade, as it were, hits the ground. That would be my concern. Additionally, I'm pinching into comments here, so let's just pause there a second. Can I get officers just further guidance and advice on the level of conditionality on this one, given what we've heard?
Yes, Chairman, I'll come in here. I am conscious, it's a very fair point, because it's a good point, because if ultimately, if there's an enforcement issue with any land, it rests with the landowner, and the council, as we understand it, is the landowner. So that's potentially a problem. However, we are definitely drifting from the usual planning remit into a legal agreement here. I think the best that we can achieve for members here is and Chairman raised the point about potential conditions. We could condition some kind of a legal agreement to detail the heads of terms or terms of use with the occupiers, the relationship between the landowner and the users, what that looks like, who's signing up to what, and we could ask for that to be submitted under a condition. That would have to come in under a discharge of condition application. And again, like I suggested earlier on, once we have the details of that, we could make the planning committee aware that we have received that application for any further comments that members wanted to make about it. If that sounds like a way forward.
It sounds like there is adding as sort of a part supplemental about George's point about just confirmation that from them, and it's probably in writing of some form, that the due process of their own constitution has been followed in regards to this acquisition, because there's a book asset. If they're doing cash accounting, it'll be a book asset for them, and they need to manage that accordingly. I've kind of strayed into comments now, so are there any comments or any additional?
Chair, I might just also add that they should be in a position to prove service on the allotment holders of this notice, and if they could prove service, we don't have a problem. And that would be by maybe possibly an affidavit, I don't know, or postage stamp receipts. Just saying.
So I think for everyone, I think that's addressing Lee's point, understanding, are the allotment owners aware of this as part of the constitution? And so if the constitution says 50% of the vote or whatever the number is, then we just want confirmation that that's happened. And whatever Lee would be satisfied in achieving that needs to be achieved, basically. We had hand up from Sherry.
Sorry, Chair, you moving to comments now? Then I'd like to put on record my comment. So I commend this application and note the support from Councillor Donegal. I note the letters of support from 11 people, actually. And I note that one of the objections refers to the possibility of allotments being destroyed by gangs of children from several schools, youth centres, adults and youth offending teams visiting, which quite frankly has really rank undertones. I'd like to say again, this is a great application which has taken on board previous deferral reasons and will serve to open up access to local school children to green spaces which they might not otherwise have access to, which we should be encouraging. Just a note on pre-application consultation, hard copies should always be provided, and a free phone helpline perhaps would be helpful for people to call and request this. But yeah, again, I commend this application and reject some of the quite frankly interesting undertones that have been placed in the objections.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments, Simon?
I may be misunderstanding, but surely the issue of what the allotment holders think is completely not the point, because you don't have to have the permission of the landowner in order to apply for planning permission. We had a case in Dundonald Park where the council owned the land and a planning application was put in, which I think was eventually successful on appeal. So I may be misunderstanding this, but I don't see how the issue of the allotment holders is relevant on planning grounds.
Come in on that.
You go in and I'll add on if there's anything else.
I think the point they're trying to make was that were all the allotment holders aware of what the actual application was? That had been the query, and therefore were they able to offer their own opinion on it based on what the actual application was compared to what they've been told?
I think that's a very fair point, Simon, you're making your comment, and I would add to Lee's point that it is also kind of the discharge of the duty as well to that, but they're all ultimately, do people know, which is always useful. Any other comments? No? Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, well, echo the thoughts of some of the other members of the panel. I think it's a great opportunity for children to get involved. I also think it's very good to have a toilet on site actually as well. I'm not an expert on allotments, but I'm not sure there are many allotments with toilets on them. So I think it's a very good addition.
I think there's going to be a trend set if colleagues do vote in favour of it. Across our borough. Okay, all right, so to the question then on the paper then. So bearing in mind what we've mentioned about conditionality, about the legal conditionality, and just confirmation of that, for the item as it is on the order paper, can I get hands in favour? Yeah, sorry, in 4.
9, Chairman.
9. Not those against?
None, Chairman.
Not voting?
1, Chairman.
Cool. Thank you very much. Apologies, that was a bit quick. We went to it. Thank you very much, Lee, for that. So next item, number 10, TPO 5 Parkside Avenue.
Chairman, we do not have the tree officer present with us tonight, so I'm happy to pick up the presentations for the next 3 applications, which are about asking members to confirm proposed, tree preservation orders that have been made but need to be confirmed so they are in place in perpetuity. The first one is the land at 5 Parkside Avenue. And yeah, it's fine, perfect. Yeah, and members will see that there is a large area of land identified as A1. And the reason for that is that we're not proposing an individual tree preservation order here. We are proposing what is known as an area tree preservation order, or if you like, I've heard it referred to in the past, a blanket tree preservation order. And what we want to do, there is a tree preservation order historically in the area, but that only applies to trees that were present at the time in 1978. So as good as our records are, we want to make sure that the trees on this site are covered. And we can't go around putting these blankets or individual tree preservation orders anywhere we like them. We have to have good reasons for doing them. And what is also acceptable is if we have a site that has planning permission to be redeveloped and we think there is a genuine threat of trees being removed. Now, this site does have planning history. When the tree officer went on there last month, it is a building site. I'll just start to flick through the photographs. You can see it's a building site. And actually, we had been told that trees were being removed, but when we went on there, the trees have been correctly fenced off. But there is no doubt that as part of the development continues, the applicant and the agent are changing their proposals in terms of the amount of tree retention that was proposed by the planning committee. And indeed, they've had to apply for that because I understand this is a conservation area. They had to apply for works for tree works. We responded to that by saying, no, we think as part of the agreed redevelopment, that not only did we want to retain all the trees at the rear of the site, which you can see there, but actually any new trees that we are achieving through a condition, we want those to be protected by the order as well. I think it's fair to say that there is a genuine risk that the developer wants to do something different here, given that both the agent and the applicant and the landowner have objected to this tree preservation order being served. So I think we were right to do it. So every tree you see within the site would be protected under this proposal. And we think that as part of the redevelopment scheme that we've allowed, that's the fair way forward and that's the right balance. And that's what the applicant should agree to. So we're asking members, despite the objection from the agent and the landowner, to support the officers in confirming this area tree preservation for everything you see on the photographs before you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, John. So we've got no speakers on this, so go straight to questions from the floor. Are there any questions at all? Cool. Comments? Question, Susie. Comment, Susie, go for it.
Really, it's in relation to the next one and on what we've just been told about the necessity for this. The next TPO we're asked about, we're asked to approve it not including a lime tree which has been cut down to a stump in the 6 months between the developer promising to keep it forever, then asking to pollard it and being told not to, and then 6 months later it wasn't there. So against that background, which grieves me deeply, I'm very much in support of this TPO.
Thank you very much. Are there any additional comments or any? No? Cool. All right. So I don't think there's anything further to add from officers on that point. Do we want to then just go to the vote? So the question is sorry, Simon, do you have a question? Oh, you are prepping, sorry. You're provisionally voting, cool. Fingers, I'll say fingers on buzzers, but as the question is on the order paper, all those in favour of the officer recommendation?
9, Chairman.
All those against?
None, Chairman.
Not voting?
1, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we're on to our next item of business, which is another TPO at 1 Weir Road.
Thank you. Yes, Chairman. So when this tree preservation order, quite correct, the point that was just made, when this tree preservation order was initially made, we were not aware at the time that one of the trees had been removed. So we have now, there are 4 trees shown on the plan before you. T1 is an elder tree that I'm afraid is now down to being a stump. And that was before the tree, we do accept that was before the tree preservation order was made. There is now growth on that stump. It has been down for a while, and we do not dispute that that went before the TPO was made. So we are not minded to pursue enforcement action against that. But going on to the point, back to the point I made in the previous application, there is clearly a threat and a risk around the trees on this site, which again is a current development site. And we have T2 and T3 and T4 that we would like to protect. So this is this is, I'm not sure I've got the right order here. So just let me go back to the plan. Yeah, so that is, just check. Want to make sure I've got the right order of trees here, Chairman, before I tell the planning committee exactly what they've been asked to approve. One second, please.
We've got it.
Apologies, Chairman. It was slightly easier for me before when I was preparing for this because each of the photographs have been labelled, but it's not showing up on the photographs at the moment, but I've just got my bearings now. So, unfortunately, if we start with T1, this is the stump with the growth coming out of it. That's the elder tree. that we accept is being removed, and we're asking members to modify the tree preservation order that has been made to delete T1, the elder tree, on the basis that obviously it can't be protected anymore. This, the photograph in front of you now is T3, that's T3. That is a fine tree, one that the tree officer is very keen to protect. That is a Dawn redwood tree. We have actually received a proposal to cut back this tree up to 6 meters high. You can come to your own judgment about the impact on that, but it's certainly not been supported by our tree officer. And that suggests the threat that there is to what we think is a very fine specimen. So we are definitely recommending to members that the tree preservation order applies to that. Then we have, at the junction, we have T2, which is the hornbeam. And that is, again, we think that is a valuable tree in the street scene that is worthy of protection. And finally, the T4, the horse chestnut. Again, we think that makes a good contribution in the character of the area. So we have a threat around this. It is a redevelopment site. We know what's happened to one of the trees. We're asking members, we've had an objection from the agent, again, similar circumstances to last time. We are asking the members to support the officer's recommendation to confirm the tree preservation order for the remaining 3 trees. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions at all? One question. One, Susie.
Not a question, well, sort of a question, sort of a comment. This particular tree, the developer promised back when he got planning permission to preserve all the trees on the site and enhance them. Then in September, he asked to cut them back brutally and was told no. And then while we were sort of waiting, he cut it down. Is there anything we can do to stop this from happening again? Not on this site, obviously, it's too late, but in other situations.
I think that's a fair question to ask. And my question would be actually on T3. It'd be interesting just to talk us through the practicalities of that, because it goes into the street scene as well, and if the applicant their responsibility to maintain that tree, and just under a very sort of high level overview of that process. Given it's on the, it does go on the highway, and the risk of damage to the tree itself as well. So 2 questions on that.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the protecting trees in the future and not seeing what's happened to the elder tree, I think we need to take account of trees in application sites that are either not council owned, not in the conservation area, not subject to the tree preservation order. Then we need to look closely at planning conditions about a tree retention scheme for those specimens that we think are worthwhile keeping, so that there's at least a planning condition that those trees are fenced off and retained. And of course, we can look during application processes when there is trees worthy of them, we can look at actually serving tree preservation orders during the planning application process. So a combination of orders and conditions through a planning application process would be my suggested ways forward. In terms of the tree overhanging the street, I understand that our officers are able to ask the applicant to carry out works to the tree that are appropriate to make sure that they are managed and maintained in the correct way. And if that is not done, then the council has the ability for the area of the tree at least that is overhanging the street to carry out the works. The green space officers can carry out the works themselves to cut that tree back. So now, of course, if it's subject to the tree preservation order, then that will require an application, but that's not a problem. We're not saying that preserved trees cannot be cut back. It's just that there is a process to go through to make sure they're not cut back too far.
Super, thank you very much. I think we, any comments to add at all other than we've had? No? Okay, so let's go into the vote now. So the question is, as on the order paper, those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please raise your hands.
9, Chairman.
Those against?
None, Chairman.
And those not voting?
Just 1, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So on to the next item of business. So it's TPO again and Coombe Lane, Rains Park.
Thank you, Chairman. And this is just for one individual tree T1 identified there at the front of the property, 296, very prominent tree. We feel it is again worthy of protection, substantial feature in the street scene. This street scene actually does have large trees on the opposite side of the road, mainly council street trees, but not so much on this side of the road. And we think that it is very worthwhile keeping specimens like this. So we've at least got that balance in the street scene. We have had, there are 2 reasons that we want this protected. One is that there has been a proposal in an arboricultural report that this is reduced by 20%. We don't necessarily disagree with that. We may well be happy with the tree being cut back by 20%, but we feel that again, this is a tree that we would want to control in terms of works to it to make sure that they are not excessive. And the other reason that we want to protect the tree is that we have had a request that it is removed. And unusually, that's not from the landowner of this future development site. This has planning permission, but it's development waiting to happen as the tree officers reported it to me. But we have had an objection from the neighbour who is very troubled by this tree for a number of reasons. I have to say, in my experience in Merton so far, it's usually the other way around, and neighbours are very concerned about trees coming down, but it's the opposite in this case. The neighbour would like to see it removed. We think that would be a step too far. We think that the concerns that the neighbour has about the tree being large on that side of the property, and so you can see that the neighbouring property is central in the screen now. You can see that there is a bit of overhang as a result of this tree over the neighbouring premises. There have been branches drop into the neighbouring driveway, that kind of thing, small branches. But we would accept some cutting back on that side. We would just like an application to see the extent of it. And we feel overall that it can be properly managed and controlled. And despite the neighbouring objection, we would ask members to support the confirmation of the preservation of this tree, please.
Super. Thank you very much, John. So no public speakers on this. Any questions from the floor? One, Tom.
Just on the one of the comments that the neighbour has made is about pushing up the roots of the tree, pushing up flagstones. Just a general question, but what's the view in terms of TPOs from the sort of council in terms of the extent to which that would need to have happened before that was the weight that's given to the fact that that's happening, I suppose would be the question. Sorry, I'm not wording my question very well.
Balance between property damage versus the tree.
That's a much better way of putting it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, clearly, if the tree was causing any sort of structural problem, then that would be a major factor weighing against its retention, and we may well accept an application. Well, we would accept an application to address tree preservation through that route. We feel that that can be monitored here. There is no structural issue. The tree should not necessarily continue to cause damage if it is cut back sufficiently. And so at this stage, we don't think that there is sufficient damage to the property that outweighs the contribution, the visual contribution that tree provides in the street scene. But yeah, if there was substantial cracking, if there was a risk of a structure not being as sound as it was because of the growth of this tree, the balance could well tip the other way. All we're asking is for that to be demonstrated through an application, and we'll consider it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. So no further questions, comments? No comments. Okay. So proceeding to the question as it is on an order paper. Votes in favour for the officer recommendation for the TPO.
Madam Chairman.
Against?
None.
not voting.
One.
Thank you very much. And so on to our final item of actual schemes to adjudicate over. So, and we've been joined by Councillor Anthony Fairclough as well. So this is the advertising panel outside 87 Broadway.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the application is for advert consent for a freestanding advertising structure. It is to replace an existing one, which is currently present. The advert would be displaying digital adverts in a digital display. It would have circa 3 meters tall and would be sited on the pavement. So if I talk you through, so this is a site picture of the existing advert panel that's there. So the proposal is, as originally submitted, it was to replace it largely in its same place. However, you'll note in the report when consulting our highways officers, actually they said move it further to the right. So the amended plan submitted before you is to move it further right by, I think it's 45, nearly half a metre further right to give more space for pedestrian movement on the pavement. And that's just a street view picture taken from the other side. So it is in a position where there is a cafe restaurant here with some outdoor seating. There is also the new sort of upgrades to the pedestrian area outside the theatre, which have been done. The theatre is listed, and you'll note in the report we have considered the impact on the setting of that listed building. So here's the proposed sort of site plan. You see the black dot, the lamp post. So it is to move a bit further, just slightly in front of that lamp post, just to assist with that distance between the outdoor seating and to improve pedestrian flow. That's the old plan. Ignore that one. This is their pack on the submission. That's just an indicative view on the original submission. It would be further right now under the proposal, but in terms of sort of dimensions and visible area, as I said, circa 3 meters tall. Obviously wired up to the electrics underground to the system. It is to be still displays, not sorry, should be the condition 4 restricts it to be static displays rather than non. We also have condition on the illumination levels proposed with the advert sign. From experience, that illumination level is fairly standard. To be honest, we get that illumination level on normal shop signs, as well as these types of displays. So we have had several of these applications in the borough, borough-wide, obviously largely in town centres. Some we've refused, some we've approved. I think the key thing with this one is replacing the existing panel that was granted in 2016, and it is moving further towards the curb at highway officer's request to make more room for pedestrian free flow. So overall, Chair, officers are happy, recommend advert consent be granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Can I invite Anthony to speak for 3 minutes on the reasons for the call-in?
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. Sorry, I'm on the move, which I apologise for being. Actually, I did call this in, but I actually think there were enough objections that it would have come to the committee anyway. This matter is an important marker in our attitude to both accessibility and active travel. Do we make it easy or indeed good to be a pedestrian? According to the council's licensing team, the pavement here is 5.6 metres to the curb line. The display unit is around 1.3 metres wide, and it's now proposed to be placed 1.05 metres from the curb line. The restaurants are allowed to use around a metre for their chairs and tables along their frontage to support their business, but if there are seated customers, I suspect slightly more space is used. This is an area of high footfall. It's near the theatre, bars and restaurants, and you've seen from the picture, the pavement also includes bike racks, a litter bin, a road traffic sign or a lamppost, and a board for the post office. Now, the Wimbledon Society, Love Wimbledon, the Merton Centre for Independent Living, as well as the restaurant and numerous residents and myself have objected to the application on numerous grounds. There are sound planning reasons to reject the application that are not covered in the report. The National Planning Policy Framework, para 127, requires that decisions that create places that are safe, inclusive and accessible, and which promote health and well-being with a high standard of amenity for existing and future users. 2017 guidance from the Ministry of Local Government on design provides the positioning and visual contrast of street furniture in design of approach routes meet the needs of wheelchair users and people with visual impairments. Whereas para 102 of the 2021 National Design Guidance produced by the Government Department provides that in well-designed places, streets are public spaces that are open to all. They encourage people to walk and cycle. They are accessible to all and designed to meet the needs of the most vulnerable users. I would ask the committee, having looked at the report and looked at the images, if they believe those design standard guidance is met and the paragraph of the National Planning Policy Framework. The report, as I mentioned, doesn't discuss any of those matters. And to simply say that permission was gained in 2016, so replacing the sign is okay, is not enough. Circumstances have changed. Most specifically, COVID requires us all now to spend far more time outside, and we've seen our shops and businesses take to the outside, rather like the restaurant, by this sign. So I would encourage the committee to reject this application. The applicant wishes to remove these old signs and put in upgraded ones. Refusing the permission here is our only way to encourage them to do that and put this one in a different place and show them that we take accessibility seriously. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and appreciate you joining us as well. Tim, do you have any particular points to come back on, perhaps in relation to some? I mean, I've noted several from Anthony's points. Oh, sorry. So, I mean, particularly about 3 points for me I noted. One was about the relation to national planning policy. 2 was about our wider policy on street scene. And 3, actually, this may be a point of clarity on, no doubt several people watching this online, the reality that what bearing does this approval or rejection have on the existing display that's there as well?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in relation to the NPPF, obviously, in terms of safety, inclusive accessibility, we do consult our highways colleagues on this. So all I can really say as Chair is our highways officer has looked at it. He's seen an issue and he's requested it to be sited further towards the curb to create more pedestrian space, but he hasn't objected to the application. So on those grounds, us as officers, we sought the technical advice and we're happy with it in terms of pedestrian safety. In terms of whether or not it's material, the existing one is there. It is. Any appeal that would be clearly highlighted by the applicant. And I think the key thing is with this, it's upgrading essentially the existing one with a more modern screen, essentially with a new facility. But it is now to be moved. They have adhered to our request and moving it further towards the curb to create more space. I think that covered it, Chair, did it?
Thank you very much. Any questions from the panel? So, hands. So, Simon, Susie, and then Stuart.
I wonder if the officer could just confirm that we could reject it using our judgment on this section of the NPPF that Councillor Fairclough has quoted. So we are able to reject it on those grounds if that's our judgment.
Good question, Susie.
Sorry, I'm just looking at when the highways officer said the gap was too narrow, DEBA didn't have its tables outside. And when this was originally granted in 2016, we hadn't had COVID and we didn't have 4 restaurants with tables outside them right next to where this is. I know this area, it's very, very cluttered. Now it's going to be moved ½ a metre, but a metre at least of space has been lost because of where DEBA now has its table. And all the other restaurants along there have tables there too. So can you just confirm, I went through with Jivan all the details, but on the plans it's measured from DEBA's glass window. In fact, if this sign is renewed, what's going to happen is the gap which was too narrow before will in fact be narrower. Can you just confirm that?
Sure.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm kind of following on from what Susie was saying. I'm just looking at this picture, and I appreciate you're not the highways, officer here, but it really doesn't. When I look at it, I don't see that being as lots of space in this area. I think of when this area must get very busy during peak times, and particularly for wheelchair users. It looks pretty bad as it is, and even with moving this out, I just don't see how it fits in with encouraging people to use our streets and encourage people to active travel. So yeah, I just want, my question would just be, how is it judged that that's a good amount of space, and what would be an unacceptable amount of space?
3 good questions. So reciting, so Simon's point, clarifying the national policy framework, would it be objectable on those grounds that Anthony raised? Susie's point and Stuart's point is very similar in the sense of what is an acceptable point, what is acceptable space in there, as well, given the fact that there is tables, chairs, etc., out by the restaurant owners.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the NPPF mentioned, yeah, it is a judgment call. What we have done, we've gone to our technical experts on highway safety, and they've come back saying it's okay, but move it further to the right. So it'll just be about members perhaps coming up with more evidence or concerns on that issue should they go down that route. But it is a matter of judgment in terms of that aspect, and also the visual judgment with an advert application. In terms of highways being aware of the tables and chairs, again, we do rely upon them looking at this from their point of view in terms of licensing, so be it. So we have taken their word on good faith here with their assessment. In terms of an acceptable amount of space, unfortunately, again, the sort of highways officers use what's called manual for streets, sometimes guidance, but they have that guidance with them. I don't unfortunately have the technical measurements before me about how wide a pavement has to be for pedestrians, including wheelchair users, etc. So again, it does fall with them in terms of their advice to us.
Thank you. Another round of questions. Jill, Dan, and then we'll do Ed.
Thank you, Chair. As a user of a mobility scooter, I can assure you it's quite a minefield trying to get through that section. And in fact, it's ridiculous, and there must be a series of very peculiar planning blunders that have created this maelstrom of metal, is the only way to describe it. Whether the bike racks came first or the advertising thing came first, it's the chicken, it's the egg, but either way, it's a lousy combination. You add to that then the COVID demands of us to be outside, which I think was lovely and should remain. I think we need to actually just review the whole blooming thing and get it moved. And if my colleagues were to support that, I would strongly recommend that would be the plan, because right now it's a mess. It's asking for an accident. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
I wondered if you could provide some clarity about what would happen were we to reject this application. Would it mean that the existing board would just remain there because previous approval was granted? If we accept this, if we vote in favor of this application, and then within 5 years, because I understand if we were to vote in favor, the license would expire in 5 years. Would we, if in 5 years time, were planning, were to come back to planning and it would be voted against, could we then remove it? I'm being a bit long-winded here, but in the first instance, if we vote against, will it just remain? If we vote in favor and in 5 years time, if it's not renewed, can it then be removed?
No, good question.
And the third one, can we, if we were voting in favor, can we attach a condition, as Councillor Manley pointed out, and I concur with her comments, could we attach a condition to move it further down the pavement, further along, so it's not such an impediment?
Ed.
Thank you. I was similar to the others. Really, I know that section very well. It's very difficult. I've tried to push a wheelchair through there. It is very cluttered. And I was wondering if there is somewhere else on that stretch. I can't think of it myself, knowing it well, but can it be moved somewhere else? Because I appreciate the effort to move it 0.5 metre, but I'm sure that if it were possible to move it 2 meters, officers would do that as well. But it's just too narrow there with everything else. It's a shame.
Thank you. So from the top, so Jill, basically, how can we review what is in our power as a condition potentially to review that area? Dan's point was echoing that as well, but if we vote against it, will it just remain? If we vote for it, then can we add conditions on it? And then what's also the timetable for renewal of the site itself as an advertising site? And then Ed's point was echoing, correct from all those. I'll just add a question onto that as well, because two of the points were similar. Given looking at the other bits of street furniture, which I believe may be in our own gift, so we're talking about the bike parking and things like this, could we ask ourselves to review that so that we are uncluttering, we are not inadvertently contributing to this problem, and we are uncluttering it ourselves and becoming part of the solution? Ed, sorry, Ed.
Thank you. Just quickly on that, with the subject of moving those bike racks, perhaps if they would just move diagonally, it would make quite a bit of difference.
Good point. So 3 questions there.
Thank you, Chair. So with ABBOT consents, they do last for 5 years. That's handed down in the legislation, essentially. So what people are supposed to do is reapply for their ABBOT consent. More often not with shops, potentially they probably don't. But with this, so essentially it would remain unless certain complaints or enforcement action taken potentially is the issue. I mean, it's granted in 2016. I haven't got the decision notice for that in front of me, but I presume it was a 5-year consent. So it might be that it is out of its time, if that makes sense. And should you approve it this evening, again, it would be a 5-year consent. I think the key thing would be, if it was approved tonight, in 5 years' time, has there been any data or issues to our highways officers and accidents there potentially that has happened in the 5 years, that then maybe their response might be different to what they've said under this application. So in terms of it, can it be moved on the plan? Unfortunately, the plans are, you have to determine what the plans are this evening, so that you can't condition it to be moved 2 meters further up the road, nor can we condition it to move the bike racks or amend them. But what we'll say is, obviously, this is council-owned land, so there's nothing to stop councillors contacting the relevant sections of the council to discuss this issue in terms of the bike racks. Should you wish to have them tweaked, moved in the future.
Can I just add we'll get questions probably from Martin and Susie. Can I just add a question first? I appreciate, because I suppose the legal point is the condition is on the applicant, not on we wouldn't be able to say move the bike racks because they're not theirs. But could we add it as a strong informative? I'm just conscious that it's just navigating the bureaucracy of what is the legislation versus the art of the possible. And at Ed's point, if it's just simply turning it an angle and it saves so much of residents' time, and that may be a possibility. But anyway, that's a long question. Susie and then Martin.
Oh, sorry, it's just gone completely out of my brain. I'm so sorry.
I'll come back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I'll just obviously say in terms of this overall location, there has been a sign in this exact location since 2008. So it is obviously a long-standing sign one way or another, because I've seen even on the 2008 map that the sign was there. My own view is obviously there's wider issues, maybe looking about where the locations are things, but I think I would be looking at all the evidence collectively. I would be in support of continuing with that as a site for a sign, but obviously looking long term, obviously about locations of things like street racks, and given obviously restaurants do have outside space as well, which is obviously changing things to some extent in terms of Wimbledon. I think no matter where you have these signs, I think there will be issues along Broadways, whether you have them or not.
I think that's a good point there. Susie.
It came back to me when I was listening to Tim. I looked at the old papers and it was a 5-year permission. So it has now presumably, I think it has actually ended. So if we don't grant permission tonight, there is therefore no permission for that sign to be there. Am I right in that?
Chairman, that would be right, and if that is the case, if the consensus run out, that's right. It is standard under legislation. We don't even actually have to put a condition on advertisement consents. We don't have to do that. It's 5 years in the legislation. If the 5 years has now expired and it's not been renewed in that time, then we can go through a process of discontinuing the advert being there.
Okay, so we've had a show up of hands because this is a bit of new information here. So Sherry and then Tom.
I just wanted some information if this application is refused and the sign has to be removed. I'm very aware that these signs do cost money and bring in revenue for the council as well. If it is removed, can it be relocated, or do you have to, or is it just thrown away and you erect a completely new sign?
Good question. And Tom.
Very much in line with what everyone else has been saying, really, about the amount of street furniture of various varieties that is around around that space. What I appreciate this is going further than this application, but I think it's relevant. What would need to happen, and who would do it for there to be a sort of wider review of sort of everything that's in a site like that, for instance? So mindful of the fact that the council's responsible for the bike racks and the bins, presumably. You then there's separate agreements with where different businesses can have different tables and chairs, or there's a lottery ticket stand next to the post office and various other things. It sort of seems like you almost, because of the nature of the fact that different people are responsible for different things, you have the sort of gradual creep of people putting things rightly where they are entitled to, the council doing it themselves, and there's not really any joined up thinking about either from an accessibility or just whether it looks nice point of view, and it doesn't seem like there's any sort of joined up thinking on that.
Can I just add on that, because we've got the chair of the Sustainable Communities Committee here, that he may be listening to that and thinking about wider street scene issues, but I'm just wary of verging more on scrutiny versus planning as well. But I think the point we're trying to make here is the same with sense of conditionality as well. So Sherry, you had a hand up quickly.
Sorry, yes, my question's been answered by Councillor Manley, so I'm happy to withdraw my question. That's fine.
Cool. So yes, so basically what is the process of discharge and the effect on the wider say council and the agreement between us and the agent, and then sort of summarising Tom's point, again talking about not conditions, but we're talking about additional statements that we want to add. for our own action, who's involved, so that it'll be highways, assume it will be licensing team potentially to be a stakeholder. I think it's just very briefly touch on that so that we're just fully aware of the effort that we're asking officers to go to correct this culmination of decisions tonight.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in terms of the relevant departments, we have Future Merton that head up with the highways section. Licensing, I believe, is separate from that, but we can take that away with us to liaise with them about the particular area of concern. I think there was a query about relocating the sign, but that would need a separate advert consent application to relocate the existing one, should that be removed.
Okay. So yeah, you go for it, John.
Yes, I agree with the point that Tim's made. We would need to refer this review of that particular part of the street scene to Future Merton, but we can go through the planning history, any consents on there, make sure everything's where it should be. Are there any enforcement issues for us? We could, are there any issues for us to pick up? We could support that review by just analysing the planning history that's happened there as well. So it'd be a team effort really between Future Merton and ourselves.
Super. Thank you. All right. Are there any? So no further questions, comments? Stuart, and then Jill, and then Simon.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate one of my earlier points, I think pavements at the heart of it should be for people. I think we should make them as wide and accessible and as open as we possibly can, and also, encouraging our businesses where within reason to use them as well, so they can bring in customers and use that as a way to drive business. So while obviously we're not discussing right now the removal of that, I think we should not be encouraging the further use and placement of such items on our pavements. So yeah, I don't think I'll be supporting this.
Thank you. Jill?
Yes, I'm in complete agreement with my friend here. I think if we are in a position where an application is running out and a renewal is sought, then this is the ideal time to refuse, let them make a new application for a different position that is much more sustainable and appropriate, and then let's go from there. But I see no point in giving this application any credence at this point, so I'll be voting against.
And Simon?
I wonder if Tim could take us back to the pictures. I think it was the second of the pictures of the site. Because I think that it was the next one, I think. I mean, there's an awful lot going on there, and I think that picture makes the case, much better than I can. So I would like to propose that we reject it under the relevant grounds of the MPPF. Thank you.
And final comment from Susie.
Can I just roundly endorse what everybody has said? I know this little area. It's the most cluttered area of pavement. It's a major thoroughfare, and it's changed. And the 5 years have now passed. And I completely agree with Councillor Manley that now is the time to say no. And JCDecaux will apply to put it somewhere else, and I'm sure they'll find another area of pavement which is not like this one, not just before the theatre, not right next to 4 restaurants. The other comment I'd make, and it hasn't been discussed, is in terms of amenity. That sign is supposed to be visible from 164 feet. The people who are having dinner are about 4 feet away. It's not a pretty conjunction. So I'm certainly strongly opposed to this being renewed.
Sherry, and I've got a comment too.
Yeah, I'd just like to concur with some of the comments made by Councillor Manley and Councillor Neighbourson. I do appreciate that these signs are needed, and they are, again, a very important source of revenue for the council. But just because something has been there for 40 years doesn't mean that it should be there for 40 more if it's really causing problems. So I would like to see in future applications, because I know there are a number of these coming up, perhaps some site visits for councillors to go and have a look at the signs and see exactly where they will be moved to, if they are being moved, because I think this would help better visualization for some of those on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. My comment would be, I mean, while we can't add additional conditions on this, I would want to add our own, on what we would be voting on. I would want to add, to be as helpful as possible, that we would look ourselves to how we would change that street scene there. So particular point Ed made about tweaking the bike racks. So you're actually keeping it as wide as possible. Again, bearing in mind this picture doesn't show where the position of the new one would be, which is, I would assume, the space between the lamppost and the sign would be covered by the new sign. And then I would also probably want to add a conditionality on the licensing team to kind of refer the street scene there on licensing. So we don't have a culmination of different policies. But that would be my, if possible, we can add those to what we'll be voting on in a few seconds. Not as conditions, but because they're ours, we're not the applicant.
Yes, I think the issue with that, Chairman, is that the advertisement consent is very much under the advertisement regulations, and the decision notice should focus on the advertisement itself. If there's an issue with the compatibility with the surrounding street furniture, then it needs to be refused.
Fair enough. So let's put this question out to everyone. So as it is on order paper, the officer to make a recommendation to approve. All those in support?
One, Chairman.
All those against?
8, Chairman.
Not voting?
1, Chairman.
There we have it. Yeah, so that's going to be my next question. Thank you very much, Amy, for the prompt. So we've rejected it, committee. There needs to be an actual planning reason for that, and more than just the National Planning Framework says it. So can we have someone, Susie's volunteering, go for it.
Can be rejected on the basis that this does not accord with the obligation to create places that are safe, inclusive and accessible, which promote health and well-being and high standards of amenity for existing and future users. Seems to me to cover it.
Does that cover it, guys?
Chairman, the reason's clear. That's fine. In terms of the planning grounds, I would just ask that we could reinforce that reason for refusal by picking out the particular local policies that we work to, and if members could just give us that flexibility to just support each of those grounds with a particular policy, we can issue a reason for refusal.
That seems reasonable to us here. Super. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah. So we take a vote then on that particular reason for refusal. So that's, as Susie outlined, plus officers will identify the translation into local policy. Can I get an agreement? So all those in favour of that? Hands.
8, Chairman.
8. All those against?
1, Chairman.
Not in voting? 1. Cool. Thank you very much. So on to our final items of business overall. So item 14, planning appeal decisions. John, team, are there anything worth noting to us? I believe there were 2, 3.
Chair, just one from my area. 33 Lingfield Road was a good decision for our permit-free policy. The developer challenged it with this new application, and it was refused by us. And the inspector held it up, which was good, about the sort of cumulative impact on parking pressures in the local area. So that's a good one there to highlight, Chair.
Chairman, I'll just say it's as you can see from the list, all decisions were made under delegated authority and dismissed as expected, really, with no major issues arising to report. However, we have just had two interesting. Is it two that we had? Well, we've had one interesting appeal decision come in recently that we would like to go into more detail next time for members.
Brilliant. We'll put a note then to hear a bit more about that then. Super. Thank you very much for your work on this. And finally, planning enforcement. Summary of cases. Is there anything that would be worth drawing our attention to at this time?
Chair, really just to highlight something quite new put in, but sort of before and after photographs really of some enforcement success there, particularly that one with the front driveway hard standing.
Is that page 212 you're referring to?
212, yeah, and 211. But other than that, just for noting, really.
Good. No, that's fantastic success. Martin, go for it.
Can I just ask that they do actually update the cover sheet, because it's got myself as the cabinet member and the old chair of the planning committee. It's a bit sloppy, if I'm honest, but yeah, if they could just change that, please.
Thank you, Martin. Yes, of course. And but overall, thank you very much, guys, for showcasing this success in returning unauthorized hard standing to its proper use. So that is it. We have no further items of business. Thank you very much.